Somewhere between high mountains and thick fog, a group of people stands before a fallen man. His hands do not seem healthy, and his overall physical condition is not good either. This is the swordsman Anzu, who is being judged as useless for having a broken sword. The warrior Alex Morgan comments that he wishes Suo had stayed with them from the beginning because the prosecutors are hard to deal with, which a female colleague agrees. This colleague is the mage named Suzuki Endo, and no matter how skilled Suo may be, she mocks him, saying that all of this is happening because of him. She also makes it clear that she hates men in suits. Due to being poisoned, he coughs up a type of black blood in his hand as his condition continues to worsen. Then rage hits him with all its strength as he begins to remember the moments he shared with his old group. This naturally leads him to wonder why they are doing this to him. The final battle against the dragon boss. Everyone fought in sync like a true team would, and after a long confrontation, they finally emerged victorious. That day had every reason to be one of joy, but this happened to the pros swordsman, who had fought alongside them all this time. Unable to contain the hatred stored in his heart, he screams, demanding an answer. But the healer named Isabella claims that she cannot do anything, since he was the only one against this decision. Suo in turn screams, asking if they are not ashamed since he helped clear one of the 5 final portals. If they had done the same with the other 4, humanity would be safe. But now his former companions have betrayed him, just like the demons they were trying to fight anyway. The archer named Hex Hood points out that at least they do not kill humans, and makes sure to remind them that he had warned what would happen if the portals disappeared. The truth was that the hunters who lived off them would lose everything, leading them to become criminals in the eyes of the people, believing that Suo does not want to become a target of people's fear. Hex says he likes the kid, and that if Suo agrees to rejoin the group, he will accept him. But it was clear that Suo would not lower himself to that level. After being stabbed in the back, regardless of everything, he did not have much time left as his body had been poisoned by Suzuki, and his wounds were already severe. Suo had no chance of surviving there, so there was only one thing he could do of all possible actions. Take one of those traitors with him for the glory of humanity seemed like the best thing to do, so Suo released the rest of his aura, thinking this would be his last attempt to be a hero. Alex is the first to feel fear, but Suzuki screams that something like this is no big deal. After all, a prosecutor with a broken sword shouldn't be able to do anything. However, despite what Suzuki thinks, the archer sees something different, but just as he was about to explain he lunged forward at high speed and in the blink of an eye cut down both the warrior and the mage, leaving the healer in shock and the archer on high alert as they were lucky not to have been hit. At this moment, his sword is clearly broken and the poison spreads throughout his body, so Jen cannot understand this force as Alex was lucky to survive. Isabella offered to heal him, but when she tried to do so, she realized that for some reason her magic wasn't working. Anyway, he falls off the cliff, but at the same time is granted the divine status of swordsman. As he falls to the ground, the system announces that he has awakened the supreme power as a swordsman and master of the untouchable technique, the first S-rank skill, plus he was the first to achieve transcendence, so the system decides to give the boy a chance to become even stronger, and thus the player system Anzu begins to reset. After a while, a boy wakes up somewhat confused in an unknown place, but he doesn't even have time to understand the situation, because he is taken by a firefighter named Suo, who's the main character of this story, and asks what is happening. Then upon seeing that the civilian is okay, the man explains that a portal opened nearby. The presence of a firefighter and the fact that he didn't die catch Suo's attention, but what surprises the protagonist the most is what unfolds right before his eyes. At that moment, an explosion occurs in the sky, and many small monsters wreak havoc in the city of Sindiran. The incredible part, however, was that this was the station that had been consumed by a portal in the past. At first, the portal had exploded, and shortly after, goblins appeared just like now. Suddenly, a sharp arrow wounds the firefighter in the back without giving him time to react. With him on the ground, one of the monsters approaches the protagonist, who is also on the brink of death. That firefighter is more concerned about telling Suo to run. Then the protagonist decides to test himself by picking up the axe from the fallen public servant. Then he stands up, and at the same time, the firefighter urges the boy once again to give up, saying that it's too dangerous to fight demons. But Suo simply throws the axe at one of them and hits directly at the vital point of the monster, taking it down completely. At this moment, the protagonist had already realized that he was now hurt and what could have happened, so as the conditions to awaken had also been fulfilled. The system notified him that it wanted him to become stronger, thinking that it was all crazy. Suo laughed as it was exactly like when he awakened as a player in the past, and now the system asks him to choose the class he wants to pursue, presenting the 4 basic classes that each member of his group once represented. Even the smallest details were being developed, exactly the same way as when the boy became a player in the past, so guided by instinct, he prepares to choose the warrior class, but at the last moment, a shout from the firefighter telling him to run stops him from taking the same path as before without thinking more carefully. In any case, the hero reassures the firefighter, saying that he doesn't need to worry. After all, he knows how to take care of himself. especially when his opponents are just a group of goblins. So, now with nothing else to say, Suo lunges at all those monsters fearlessly. The first of them prepares to split the protagonist in two, but Suo watches calmly. It dodges below without any difficulty, leaving the monster very confused by the hero's abnormal speed and scared, because Suo not only dodges but also positions himself to recover the axe now that he has a weapon in hand. Again, our hero seems even more confident. Then with just one move, he takes out a monster from behind that had tried to attack seconds before, demonstrating how superior he is to these weaklings, even without having a class. Yet when the goblin falls defeated to the ground, his changes the axe for the monster's sword while thinking that only rookies fear these beings therefore. For him as a veteran, it is not difficult to point the sword at the whole group and declare that he will eliminate them all. After a few more seconds of fighting, another monster is defeated, and like lightning, the hero darts among the goblins, destroying them one by one until he corners, and finishes off the last one with a sword strike to the chest, becoming the victor after taking down all those monsters. Suo reflects while looking at the dirty sword. He still feels the same rage as before, and that's why he believes he can't let his frustration out here. And the most important thing now, according to Suo, is to keep a calm mind considering everything so far. He believes there must be a reason for having gone back in time, but still, it is an opportunity to redo everything from scratch. After that battle, the system indicates many improvements and skill increases for the protagonist. All these skills are basic in handling the sword, and the boy hadn't seen them in a long time. Therefore, although the goblin's sword is a bit small, it will do. With that, the firefighter from before gets up asking if the hero is a player, and upon answering yes, he calls the system, saying that he has already made his decision. Then the option to choose a class appears again, but this time the one he believes is best is the healer class to avoid mistakes. The system asks a second time, and Suo confirms his decision. In this way, 5 attribute points are granted, and the hero masters the healing light of rank F. Without further delay, he asks the firefighter to turn around so he can see the wound, and before doing anything, warns that the procedure might hurt a little while. The firefighter remains confused. The hero uses the light and of healing capable of recovering the injured area, so he quickly removes the arrow and begins treatment until he manages to close the wound. This way, he asks how the firefighter feels, and since it no longer hurts, the man asks if the boy is a healer. Then Suo replies that this time yes, which seems a bit suspicious. At that moment, a system message appears, granting the boy the right to choose a weapon from the arsenal for using healing for the first time. That's why, even though he finds it a bit strange, Suo chooses the beginner's sword, and thus the weapon materializes in his hand, allowing the protagonist to receive a sword worthy for battle. At the moment he wields the weapon, the hero analyzes the blade's edge and decides to clean the portal. Now, obviously, the firefighter tries to intervene, but once again asks him not to worry, saying it's nothing serious. So far, the hero had acquired the skill of swordsmanship without even having a class. Since it was based on talent, because of that, he can use his powers regardless of class. And now that he has the healer class, the higher his level, the better his abilities will be. In the past, they said that the light of the Holy Spirit of Isabella also came from healing light. If the boy at least could have healed himself at that moment, the outcome would have been very different. Therefore, this time his decision is to become a swordsman and healer at the same time, because to prevent that from happening again, he needs to become even stronger than his previous group. Now, what the hero needs to do is acquire skills and level up. Recalling this portal more clearly, it becomes evident that it is of the unpredictable type. In his past life, the protagonist almost died because of it, but now things are different. Maybe it could still be a bit difficult, since his current skills were low level, but still, he remembered what it was like to be a swordsman. So he just had to do everything again. So he placed his hands on the portal and activated the entry through the system, causing him to be transported instantly from the city where he was to the Red Forest, which had unknown entry conditions and an unknown maximum number of people allowed. While walking through that mysterious place, the protagonist, who thought the goblins had come out of the portal to attack people, is surprised, because everyone inside had already been defeated, so they had possibly entered the portal just to escape at some point during the walk. A noise near his ear makes it clear that the inhabitants are there. More precisely, the inhabitants responsible for the forest being called the Red Forest. These are the job goblins, and while one of them is level 10, the other is level 12. Quickly, the stronger of the two throws the body of the goblin. They hunt it to the ground, laughing, and then points his sword, challenging the protagonist to a fight, basically. The message behind this is that he wants to hunt Suo instead of the goblins. Unlike the normal goblins, this race has red skin and much stronger muscles. However, even though an attack is approaching, the protagonist is not afraid, because despite everything, they are still weak. Goblins for a veteran like him, even though he is not afraid of his opponent, the protagonist decides to dodge first. This is because his current level is too low to easily cut the job goblin, but since that is the case, he thinks of another strategy capable of overcoming this problem and moves forward with all the speed to attack the lower level monster, first using the strategy of aiming at the beast's weak point, which in the case of these opponents is the eye, even with the level difference. Between them, the protagonist manages to be effective, but knows that if they were a bit stronger, he would be in trouble. Still, for the hero, the hobgoblins are still just weak monsters, therefore he quickly finishes. With the first monster in front of him even feeling a bit surprised by how quickly he did it then, Suo blames himself a little and thinks he should be more careful next time, especially because he needs to use one of them as a test subject to find the rest of the beasts in the group. The remaining hobgoblin is filled with rage upon seeing his defeated companion. Because of that, he charges furiously at the protagonist and tries to attack in every possible way. But none of them even come close to hitting him. At one point, the hero thinks that if he keeps hitting the monster, he might end up gaining more skills, so if he keeps dodging its attacks, he could also gain something which is proven. When the protagonist masters the rank B evasion, then now that he has achieved what he wanted, the hero draws his weapon and blocks the monster's attack. Just as it gets close at this world, blocking is so important that there is even a weapon made just for that, and it is a basic skill that supports many others. Thanks to that, the second time the protagonist blocks the monster's advance, and soon 1/3, until he masters the rank B blocking skill, which leaves him satisfied. Fortunately, the hero manages to do this before the monster is defeated by exhaustion. So now that he can finish this prolonged battle, Suo sends the job goblin to meet the same fate as his companion with no more opponents. The hero thinks about finding another, and when a mysterious silhouette appears, Suo decides to focus on leveling up. Back in the city, the civilians are gathered a little far from the portal and several nearby players are trying to get in by any means. All were very irritated to the point of wishing the worst for Suo for entering without permission. But at that moment, none of them knew who was inside. The firefighter from before reported to the officials that a player who had just awakened entered the portal alone, but he also did not forget, mentioning that this player killed all the goblins by himself and healed his own wounds. In any case, those men in suits arrived too late, although the fact that a healer killed all those monsters by himself really left one of them confused. Judging by the monsters in that place, the portal didn't seem to be difficult, but entering alone is not the action of a healer. Besides, the officer wonders how a healer can act like a warrior, until he also calms down considering the possibility that the player may have entered by accident. But if he really manages to clear the portal alone, things could be different with nothing else to do there. The officer tells his assistant to inform him if anything changes and pulls out his phone, thinking he needs to find out who this guy is at all costs. Back at the portal, the protagonist advances with his sword in hand, and having already leveled up considerably, he starts killing several hobgoblins with great ease. So when he approaches another group that initially seems confident, they are eliminated at once, except for one who suffers severe damage, but still tries to take the opportunity to fight for that. The hero kicks the beast's hand before it can grab a sword. The monster tries to speak, but no sound comes out, so the hero standing in front of him simply tells the hobgoblin to run after his companions, to ask for help, and make sure to bring back as many as possible to where he is. Meanwhile, the protagonist decides to take a look at his stats. He knows it's better to evolve all of them instead of focusing on just one, and feels satisfied for having obtained a very good bonus now that he has acquired most of the basic skills. The next step is what comes ahead. Then looking at the body of one of the monsters, he pierces it with his sword until he touches a crystal. Luckily, what he was looking for was in one of those monsters, and although he doesn't know much about it, he decides to take it. This is a magical stone that, if it's large, is classified as rank D and is worth about 50,000 wons per piece. Before, the protagonist didn't even bother to pick up something so small, but now, unfortunately, he has run out of money. Therefore, he seriously considers whether he should spend his time collecting the rest, which is inevitably exactly what he does until he reaches the last of the magical stones, which will at least ensure him to a good amount of starting money. At this moment, the ground begins to tremble, as if an earthquake is occurring. Then, looking around a bit, the hero realizes that the guests have finally arrived and that the boss of the portal will probably appear afterward due to that. In that battlefield, a horde of about 30 hobgoblins emerges. Believing that he should level up a bit more before facing the boss, the hero asks if the monster, the one he forgave, wants to go to the afterlife along with his friends. Obviously, without any dialogue, the hobgoblins charge toward the threat with everything they have and being more numerous. They feel quite confident, however, to their misfortune. Their opponent is faster than they expected, and with just one jump, he manages to get into a favorable position, which allows him to eliminate several of them with a simple, continuous slash from start to finish. One of the survivors tries to attack from the side, but the hero defeats him instantly. Also, the system indicates a level and attribute increase for the protagonist, but since there are still many left, he prepares to finish this quickly. First, the boy cuts one from behind, and then those coming from the sides, thus using his speed as an advantage. He silently eliminates one of them using all the swordsmanship techniques he learned in his past life, that is, until something catches his attention. And suddenly, a stronger monster attacks the hero's defenses with an axe, but instead of being afraid, the hero is happy about it, because finally, right in front of him, appears the level 20 hobgoblin boss still within the portal in the Red Forest. An explosion occurs caused by the outcome of an attack. The boss proves to be very powerful, With each brutal blow he delivers, so the hero defends and dodges, but another monster appears behind him trying to take advantage. Very irritated by the interruption, the protagonist shouts that the younger ones should not interrupt a fight between elders and thus destroys not only that one but several others nearby and all that destruction. The Hobgoblin boss uses the fear skill. Because of this, the hero goes into a state of panic, which causes his muscles to freeze completely. Fear is a skill that causes panic and increases the user's attributes according to their level, therefore, it sounded expected to see a monster using such a special resource in a place like this with the boss behind him and several monsters. In front, the protagonist finds himself cornered. He can no longer do anything about it since he has no mental protection, skill, or item. Thus, the boss advances at the same time as his subordinates to attack together. However, the hero knows a way to neutralize fear even without any skill, and all he needed to do was inflict himself pain in his own body. In this way, the panic state is neutralized, allowing the boy to return to his normal state. Barely escaping that situation, the protagonist now manages to counter the boss's charge, leaving him very confused. Before anything else, he understands that the wisest decision is to face the others first, so even more brutally than before. He removes the entire support group that appears nearby, activating a system message that says all the lesser monsters in the forest have been defeated. Thus, the protagonist uses the healing light and the wound on his left hand closes. Now that everything is resolved, the hero faces the boss once again, and in contrast to the monster who seems quite distressed, the hero suggests they have some fun together. A fierce battle unfolds between the two most powerful in the Red Forest, but while the boss monster is very focused, the hero acts naturally and begins to leave his opponent increasingly pressured and exhausted. At this moment, Suo cannot inflict much damage due to the level difference, but he manages to cut him, so he just keeps inflicting small wounds until he manages to explode a wound on the monster's leg and further enlarge it with another attack, turning that small scratch from before into something much bigger and more dangerous. In an attempt to retaliate, the boss uses the fear ability again, but now it no longer works since once neutralized, it cannot be affected again. Quickly, the hero pulls the sword from the monster's leg and continues attacking in various ways. At this moment, he feels confident enough to declare victory, and finally, with one more attack using all the strength he has, he inflicts another wound on the monster's chest, leading it to total exhaustion, which is clear when the boss falls face first to the ground in front of the protagonist. In every possible way, the monster tries to react, but in that condition, he cannot. That is, until unexpectedly the protagonist approaches and instead of finishing him off, uses the healing light on the monster, restoring it to a certain level of health. But this action was not irresponsible, as he only did it because he still needed to use that boss a little more. After a long time of creative training, several of the hero's skills level up, and then once again, the protagonist extends his hand to use the healing light on his training dummy, but this time the only thing the monster does is kneel, protecting its head and trembling in fear. Therefore, the overwhelming intimidation that surpasses the wild strength of the portal boss grants the hero the intimidation skill. In the end, that was the only thing missing to achieve everything he wanted, so now he can finally end this clash between the two, and with a simple sword movement, that is exactly what he did, sending the boss to where his subordinates were. And when the final opponent of the forest is defeated, Suo also receives the B-rank decapitation skill, and he is notified that the portal is successfully cleared and that the MVP was Suo, for which he received a bonus point and additional experience. With one more level, all attributes increase by 1, and upon reaching level 10, the hero gains 5 additional bonus points. The healing light skill that heals wounds levels up to rank E, and now the E-rank healing appears, which treats illnesses. Now the protagonist no longer needs to worry about negative effects, and if he continues to improve his skills, he might be able to cure all poisons, so he believes he already has everything he needs. And then he heads to the portal, walking slowly while thinking about seeing certain people. After all this time outside in the city, the public commotion continues. Just like before, however, they notice a change in the portal that leaves many scared at the possibility of monsters reappearing. Fortunately for everyone, who comes out from inside is actually a person instead of an enemy, and that person is none other than the healer Suo in person. Naturally, people can't believe that the boy actually went in alone and cleared the entire portal. On the other hand, important figures try to take advantage of the situation to recruit Suo, but in an instant he disappears from where everyone is jumping at high speed until he reaches the ground. And facing someone in particular, he says that it is a pleasure to meet him more precisely. He says it is a pleasure to meet the leader of the Korea Hunter Association, Jung Chilman, which is a bit strange for the others since Chilman doesn't know Suo. Sometime later, still at dusk at the team headquarters, the protagonist is practically interrogated by Chilman. However, the leader can't stop thinking about the moment they met not long ago. because the first thing the hero did was extend his hand. Cheolmin obviously asked if there was any pending matter, but Suo asked to go to the association first. After all, he already needed to go there to request a hunter's license, which left the leader astonished that the boy still didn't have one, as he was still going to do that. The fact was that the protagonist was an unauthorized hunter who had just awakened. Besides, his chosen class was healer, which is the weakest of the four. However, he still managed to clear the portal just looking at the results of the association's test. The boy is certainly a healer, but looks like a warrior. In any case, he claims that he has no problem with the results and confirms the name Suo. However, he asks what he was doing, the boy, with his life, and hears that the hero dropped out of college and was unemployed for the head of the association. It made sense to assume that the boy was a student in the health field, but another surprise comes because he actually studied physical education. In that case, what Cheolmin thought was that the warrior or archer class would be much more suitable, so the hero had to explain, making up an excuse that he was sore. Changing the subject, Cheolmin asked about the protagonist's time inside the portal, therefore he responds simply that when he entered, he killed some hobgoblins that attacked him to survive, and without giving the leader of the association time to be surprised, the protagonist demonstrates it by filling the president's desk with magic crystals. Basically, Suo is playing dumb, saying that he got those stones after defeating someone who seemed to be the boss, and since he doesn't know much about magic stones, he simply asks Cheolmin that the association's chief will take care of processing them for him, starts the task, but first asks if the hero really wants to become a hunter, and without any doubt, the hero replies yes, saying that he decided at the moment he woke up, which makes Cheolmin very excited. In any case, the man asks if there is another reason. Then the hero replies that yes, but finds it funny that Cheolmin cannot hide his happiness. Getting straight to the point, the hero says there are many reasons why people want to become hunters, but in his case, his motivation is the hatred he has towards demons and the portals. Unfortunately, the protagonist lost his entire family in the portal. In fact, he knew it was dangerous, but it was only because he couldn't control his anxiety throughout this time. The boy acted thinking he could reduce his hatred for demons, but so far nothing had changed. Therefore, after suffering for so long, he realized what he had to do so that there would be no more victims like him and so that people wouldn't lose what is valuable because of the portals. The hero declares that he wants to work for people's safety, and that's why he wishes to volunteer to be part of the Korea Hunters Association initially. Cheolmin is surprised, but despite liking the hero's motivation, asks if he's sure. After all, being a member of the association means living like a public servant, which brings his salary not as good as that of other guilds. Despite that, the protagonist comments that what he wants goes beyond the salary. Sujo wants access, free and property rights over the portals, including the unpredictable. He also wants the authority to apply punishments extreme to the crimes committed by the players. Basically, what the protagonist wants is to be on the front line, clearing as many portals as possible, even though the association has property rights over the portals. Most of the time, they are auctioned to the guilds, and the reason is that it's not worth risking life for such a low salary, so they avoid unnecessary danger. Generally, public servants choose this path without asking for much in return, since most of them can make money in other ways. Besides going into the portals, in the end, it's like an office job where they do everything to avoid a risk that endangers life, but for some reason, that Cheolmin still doesn't understand. Sujo is different. Sujo presents himself as a guy who not only cares about others, but also wants to fight on the front lines. Basically, the ideal example of what a public, patriotic hunter should be. Therefore, the happiness was so great for Cheolmin that he thought he might faint. Leaving that aside, the team leader says he will finish completing the boy's admission and will check his documents so he can take the preliminary tests and then participate in the hunter's field training. And to the protagonist's surprise, the applications for this year's exam had already closed, but luck appeared because Cheolmin said he could still include him. After all, the fact that the protagonist cleared a portal alone was already enough reason for the superiors to approve him. Plus, Cheolmin wants to personally recommend Sujo, and although he warns that the written exam will be difficult, he says the physical part will not be a problem. So Sujo commits to studying that day, but with quite a bit of confidence now, he suggests taking one of those tests just to gain a little experience in case he fails. In that case, Cheolmin, surprise, comments that they can start as soon as today. However, the hero suggests the next day, already apologizing because he says he has no money until the magic stones are processed. So Cheolmin rushes to process them as quickly as possible. Throughout all his years in his past life, Cheolmin was the only one he could trust. So now that he was back by his friend's side, the hero thanked him for the help. Some time after the admission exam, the leader informs him that he had already deposited the earnings from the sales of the magic stones, which surprises Sujo by rising to 3 million. A little embarrassed, Cheolmin explains that public officials are exempt from the processing fee of stones, so the hero decides to ask for another favor. Sujo heard that there is a library in the association and that several books from there will be used in the exam. Hero knows it's late to study, but insists on reviewing some material. Then Soho asks if he can have permission to go in there and prepare, even if just a little, and fortunately, Chiyoman says it's something very easy with a smile. Shortly after, the two arrive at the library and Chiyoman says that the hero does not need a card to go out. So he lets the protagonist stay as long as he wants and says goodbye, hoping he passes the test in the end. Sujo was quite happy to see that his old friend was still the same as before. Even now, he was a kind and reliable person, but who still had not thought about becoming president of the Hunters Association of Korea, changing the subject. The protagonist thinks that it's hard to pretend he knows nothing because he feels guilty for deceiving him. However, acting suspiciously could cause a stir, so the protagonist simply decides to go look for that. One of the most important things that will happen in the future. His son cannot remember everything because he is human, but at least he believes it would be good if he could acquire that ability. And at one point, by a twist of fate, he finds the book he is looking for slightly sticking out from a shelf. Without thinking twice, the hero grabs that huge encyclopedia. The name of this book is Book from Another World, and although it seems simple, it contains a lot of good information. It even has usage instructions. However, the way the protagonist reads it is unconventional, since he places the book open on his head and only after waiting for some time does he realize that it's not working. Obviously, he got frustrated for looking foolish, but that was how the instructions were written. At least that's what he thought. Because suddenly, a message appeared informing that the Library of Memories was interested in Sujo's story, and soon that same library sent an invitation, opening again over the hero's head, but this time it sucked him in by itself, to a portal that took him to the secret location of the true Library of Memories. It is said that the library makes a person remember everything they have seen or heard, even if it is something painful. The human mind has a forgetting mechanism, and that's why people don't remember many things, but the library is different, like a curse. The person who obtained this ability before was the leader of the Hexagon Guild and a former employee of the association. While studying in the library and preparing to leave, she fell asleep on a book that was large and soft, and that's how she was lucky enough to obtain a skill. Thanks to her, now it is the protagonist who has the ability, so he thinks about returning the favor by inviting her to lunch later. The library system asks if the boy would like to donate his story to the place. Therefore, he remembers that one of the abilities is to recall everything he has forgotten, and since he has returned in time, it is essential to keep in mind all the distortions that will occur over time, making this ability one of the most necessary. Upon accepting the suggestion, Sujo donates his story to the memory library. Then he begins to visualize and document all of the protagonist's memories, transforming his body into a book that starts to be flipped through, and through a magic circle, it transforms into dozens or even hundreds of books that fly through the sky. So shortly after this process, it was announced that the Library of Memories had been mastered. This is a rank A ability where all of the protagonist's knowledge can be accessed whenever needed. Perhaps because it is an imaginary space, Sujo felt quite strange having his memories extracted, but in any case, since he succeeded, he decides to test it. Willing to see the power of this ability, the protagonist calms his mind and soon opens his eyes in a place with strong winds. This was the place of his last moments in his previous life. Even now, the protagonist can feel the emotions he had that day, but he believes it could be due to the Library of Memory. That group of merchants wanted to keep the portals open purely out of greed. So when he remembers the moment he fell from that cliff, the hero becomes even more determined to take revenge. In any case, Sujo regrets a little not having gone to look at something else, but only until he witnesses his last moments and notices two windows appearing in front of him, which surprises him. The messages said that the system would give Sujo a second chance for being the first to reach transcendence, and before he could understand what it was about, the protagonist returned alone and very confused to the library space. According to the messages, he had reached the divine state along with his first S-rank skill, and for having reached the level of transcendence, he was given another chance, which was something completely incomprehensible. However, this still means that the fact that he returned was not a coincidence. Sometime later, after a brief trip, our hero gets out of a taxi at his destination. At that moment, he believes that what matters is not the reason but the fact that he has returned to the past. Therefore, besides avoiding what happened to him, the boy wants to deal with the portals that cause the most deaths. At least, that's what he wants to try, and preferably at a much faster pace than in the past. Therefore, to achieve this goal, he cannot waste a single second of this opportunity. And that's why the place where the protagonist is located is the Nexus headquarters. Nexus is a private academy for hunters, and rumors say it is the largest in the country. Therefore, since he will need a lot of money in the future, he plans to earn some there. Right at the entrance, a staff member asks how they can help. Without wasting time, Suho asks to speak with Director Kim Soo, which surprises the receptionist. She asks if the gentleman has a scheduled meeting, but he denies it, saying he only wants to share something important. Obviously, the staff member refuses, so the hero changes his request to delivering a message, and the message that Sujo leaves for the director is that the man who cleared the Cinderalm station portal by himself is here. With such an impressive introduction, it doesn't take long before they go to the office of the Nexus director, who introduces herself as Kim Soo. In response, the protagonist also introduces himself, and then they sit down. Taking the initiative in the conversation, the director admits that she knows of his achievements and asks the reason for his visit. Then the hero replies that he is there for a scholarship and informs her that the exam for obtaining the hunter's license will take place the next day, which he will also take, leaving the director a bit confused. However, Kim asks when the boy woke up, and surprisingly, he responds that it was today. Naturally, the director thinks it's crazy that someone without even a license takes the admission exam. And beyond that, it's even crazier that he cleared the station portal by himself. However, the hero reveals that thanks to a member of the association, he will be able to take the test, in which he also intends to come in first place. Therefore, if he succeeds, he requests to be accepted as a student at the Nexus Academy, and along with that, he obviously asks for a generous scholarship as a reward. Sujo has in mind that it is difficult for a complete novice to reach the top, but as a veteran, he has already cleared several portals. Still, believe it or not, the decision will be solely up to Director Kim. For his part, he finds the protagonist's achievements impressive, but reminds him that the probability of passing is less than 20%. Therefore, the hero assures that if he is not the best, he won't mind being ignored for the scholarship in the first place, remembering that there is also hexagon in primes. The director asks why Sujo came directly to Nexus, then without hiding anything, he says it is because this academy is in a worse situation than the others. As far as he knows, Nexus Academy is the largest in the country, but in recent years, it has failed to recruit a student who placed first or second, and since then, the number of students has been declining, which, although sad, is the reality. The director knows they have to do something, and although he has never seen a beginner evolve so much, the possibility that Sujo fulfills his words brings hope, after all. He would not only be the person who cleared a portal alone, but also the one who scored the highest on the association's test. Therefore, if Sujo really joins Nexus, the one who will benefit the most will be the academy itself. The director believes she doesn't have much to lose, so without being naive, she asks how much the boy wants to receive. Suho, in turn, asks how much they pay the most qualified student, to which the director responds that it's 30 million plus reimbursement of tuition fees. Additionally, the student has free access to the academy's guild, but Kim knows that this is not all that the hero wants. And after thinking about it a bit, what the protagonist asks for is 10 times more than what the best student gets. Sujo asks for 300 million, considering the extras for placing first, and with a mischievous smile, he comments that something like this shouldn't be much for such a well-established academy. Therefore, even feeling pressured, the director accepts the conditions, thus offering a reward of 300 million if the boy passes the test. And as she is going to draft the contract now, she allows the protagonist to take a stroll. The more he walks, the more he realizes how perfect this place is to achieve his goals. Then a person who seems to have woken up to accompany him agrees, saying that it is to be expected from the best academy in the country. Suho thanks him for accompanying him so late, and although tired, the man comments that he cannot refuse special guests. A little further, the hero notices someone who appears to be a student training in the area. To explain the situation, the guide informs him that this is the most dedicated student in the academy. He shouts the name Dan, advising him to take a break from training. However, since he is in his third year, this man Kang Dae-han believes it is his duty to push himself a little more. In the past, Dae-han was the #1 tank in the country, and Suho remembered him, having fought alongside him, known for his great strength. Therefore, it was a shame that tanks had lost relevance over time. Noticing an axe instead of a shield, Suho understands that the young man has not yet found his path, but contrary to what it seems, that is good, because he could use the opportunity to intervene early. Dae-han is someone who will join the Nexus Guild in the future, so Suho thinks he should befriend him and take him to the association. When the two meet for the first time in this timeline, the guide introduces them and the atmosphere is quite friendly. Knowing that the boy will also take the test, Suho asks if he plans to use the axe as his main weapon. Surprisingly for Dae-han, what the hero wants to know is the reason for his choice. Therefore, although feeling a little pressured, he replies that it was a recommendation from the academy, and the guide agrees with the suggestion, saying that the axe is perfect for someone as strong as him. In this case, the hero asks if the young man intends to keep using it. In response, Dae-han, who considers himself a slow learner, replies yes, since it took him 2 years to become competent with the axe. However, the truth was that it took so long because the weapon did not fit his aptitude. That is why the hero does not know if the boy is naive or just foolish for not trying to make changes. Even after being stuck for so long anyway, now he understands the reason for the academy's situation being so bad, and to change that, he boldly states that he thinks differently, since all players have different attributes. Suho says that the boy should use the weapon he feels most comfortable with because he will be able to evolve a lot with the right skills and items as he gains experience. Suho speaks without hesitation that Daehan does not fit well with the axe for the hero, given that the boy took 2 years to learn how to use it and was still bad at it. That was a sign that they were not compatible. Suho admits that the axe is good as for those with destructive strength, but points out that without a defense plan, the openings created would be fatal. In summary, what Suho says is that Daehan is too big to be protected by another tank. Just thinking that 3 years of effort had been wasted made Daehan very worried. However, since the boy persisted for 3 years, even if it was a mistake, the hero claimed he had the aura of a great tank. Therefore, Suho suggested a combination of a shield in the left hand with a one-handed weapon in the right, which would greatly increase his practicality. In any case, the idea of becoming a combat tank one day before the test does not excite Daehan much. But to that, the hero responds by asking what the boy thinks is the main role of the Daehan group. He thinks it's the mage, but Sujo immediately corrects him, saying it's the tank. After all, when facing the main opponent, the tank is responsible for defending both the mage and the healer. In that case, Daehyun suggests using just a shield, but the hero says that there are many forms of crowd control, and he says that in his opinion, the tank should have at least one weapon at his disposal. Fortunately, Daehyun agrees to try this new way of fighting, his eyes shining with excitement, and in this way, the two say goodbye on friendly terms. At this moment, his oppression is alone again with a guide. They attract attention, as the director asked him to showcase the academy. The young man is curious to know if his O will request a teaching position for the young man. The protagonist's knowledge of the equipment is excellent, however, knowing it would be strange for someone without a license to become an instructor. He responds with a blatant lie, saying that he just guessed it. And thinking he has waited long enough, he cuts the topic and asks to go see the contract with the director the next morning. On the day of the admission exam at the headquarters of the Korea Hunters Association, the place is full of players who want to take the exam to obtain a license and naturally a good position, but Hansu, who cleared a portal, is just an exception to the rule, because unlike the others who prepared in advance, our hero's condition was the worst of all. Sometime later, an organizer kindly asked the participants to line up according to the number they had been given, and as an anti-doping check will now be conducted. The hero thinks it's no big deal, because the people who usually use these tricks don't consume, but enhance their abilities. Among the strongest present are level 5 hunters, but one of their magic is certainly superior. However, not only he, but several others are doing the same, and since the protagonist's sensitivity to distinguish mana is greater than many others, he acquires the mana sensitivity skill level B. Looking with this sensitivity, it becomes even clearer that the place is a mess, and the hero already knew that the association's system wasn't very good, but since he didn't imagine there would be so many people cheating, he decides to do something about it. As always, Cheon-min is in the audience helping when his own needs support. That's why the hero passes. Some people who don't seem very happy with the written test, and the same happens with our hero, who also cheated in the end as he only passed thanks to the memory library. Anyway, leader Cheon-min asks if the protagonist did well in the written exam, then when Suho responds that yes, the man explains that he is there to provide support since he had. In any case, Cheon-min praises the hero's intelligence, so Suho needs to play a little dumb by changing the subject, so he says he has a request to make, not for help, but related to the test. What the hero questions is why they don't conduct a mana test while he's doing his test. The protagonist says he observed things and now asks Cheon-min to do the same. Conventional blood and urine tests can detect drugs in the body and also prevent item fraud by confiscating all belongings. However, he also believes that skills should be checked because using mana detection makes it easier to identify cheaters. And in response to this advice, Cheon-min simply thanks him and says he will make sure to check before the physical test. But before our hero leaves, the association leader asks him to wait a minute and sincerely tells him he is hoping Suho passes, as he is looking forward to working with him. Naturally, Cheon-min also hopes the protagonist scores well, and so the two say goodbye with our hero, thanking him for the support. Sometime later, in the practical testing room, when everyone is gathered, they are informed that the test will be delayed 2 hours due to issues with the capsules. Therefore, in the meantime, they can wait in the lounge, but this was actually an excuse to deal with the cheaters. There are 1,200 candidates in this test, and the success rate is below 10%, which could drop to 7% if all the cheaters are caught. So the hero thinks it's a good idea to look around. Maybe he will find someone useful. In one corner of the lounge, a young man challenges an older man to fight, mocking him and saying he is scared. Feeling offended, the adult pushes the young man with a strong shove. He was fed up with being provoked, but since the boy had just been attacked, he didn't wait to react, and with a simple move, he was about to crush the adult if the protagonist hadn't intervened at just the right moment, sending that arrogant boy flying and leaving him a bit confused. Obviously, the adult becomes even angrier, so the hero comments that he will take care of it and explains that he is not an inspector, but but a participant who wants to resolve this matter on behalf of the big guy. Then the man sees no reason to refuse, but the delinquent asks what Suho is doing anyway. The protagonist introduces himself, and knowing that the boy wants to fight, he offers. But unexpectedly, the response he hears is that the boy doesn't want to fight with trash like him. The young man himself says that Suho is lucky he doesn't want to fight and then tells the intruder to leave immediately. But knowing how this guy behaves, our hero asks him if he is a coward, and that was enough to infuriate the boy more than ever, but it also excited him, because he was already getting bored not finding anyone brave enough there, so the protagonist challenges him once again to fight, especially since he knows there is a training ground nearby later at the designated place. The spectators in the crowd see the two as selfish idiots. The supervisor on his part points out that they can only use training weapons provided by the association and that he will intervene at the first sign of danger nevertheless. He accepts the fight between the two and signals them to start quickly. The delinquent tries to hit the protagonist with a punch, but he dodges it, leaving him with a bad taste in his mouth. Not wanting to give up, he tries to attack again, saying that he will cut that annoying face off the hero. But the protagonist steps on the boy's weapon, and when he practically immobilizes him, he asks if the delinquent was really that weak, and if he was just boasting before when he pretended to be strong, which obviously infuriates the boy in the past. This delinquent named Park Jong was known as the Crazy Swordsman. Park had an immense thirst for power, and always tried to fight with others whenever he had the chance, no matter how strong they were. After all, he was someone who only thought about power. This thirst for power eventually led the boy to become a hunter-killer in the future. Inevitably, the protagonist knew he would be in a place like this when he saw him in his past life. Park was really strong, so now he wants to prevent that path from repeating, but better than talking is showing it in practice. So he makes the boy slide across the ground and then mocks him, asking again if that was all Park had to show despite his confidence. The hero also suggests they stop, since he knows this must be Park's first time fighting someone at level 10. However, the boy laughs at his own situation and claims that the protagonist is too relaxed. He says he will fight seriously from now on, which of course poses no problem for our hero. Without wasting time, Park charges and strikes down with all his strength, but the hero defends himself using only one hand, and even when several more attempts are made, he remains impressively calm. Despite that, he admits that Park is better than before, but the boy cannot understand how he is still so far behind, and because of that, he decides to use his strongest move, crouching in an intimidating stance. This form is from the boy's original technique called the Dragon Sword, and with great pride in his power, he charges with all his strength, telling the hero to go to hell while a powerful explosion is generated. Park is sure that the protagonist could not have dodged it. However, the reality is that once again, his attack did nothing because he continued blocking it with the same ease as before. Park screams, asking, "How is it possible?" And the hero replies that it is natural to block such a slow attack. The truth was that this was not the real Dragon Sword, but a basic technique, since the real one was impossible for beginners. Anyway, the criminal's fury keeps growing, and in time and again he tries to break the protagonist's defense, but our hero shows not a single sign of concern on his face. At one point, Park gains a favorable position, and believing he has an opportunity, puts all his power into trying to eliminate the protagonist once and for all, but unfortunately for him, Suo counters by hitting him on the chin before he can do anything, which leaves him completely confused and unconscious instantly. But for the hero, it was easy to understand because, as he said before, the criminal's speed simply wasn't enough with his opponent on the ground. Suo believes it's better to stop because if he injures him more, he could get into trouble. For the moment, the protagonist knows it's better to focus on himself than to get involved with others. And now that Park has been schooled, the protagonist believes that the training center will finally be at peace, with nothing more to do there. Suo calls the supervisor, who initially seems a bit distracted, and since he knocked out his opponent, he asks the man to wait with the boy until he wakes up. After those 2 hours, the physical test finally begins with the participants entering the capsules in the area. There are more supervisors than before who are possibly disguised mana inspectors, and under the pretext that they are not compatible with the capsules, several cheaters are gradually removed in the case of the hero. Since he is already ready, he is told he can lie down, and if something strange happens during the test, the instruction given is to press the emergency button. Thus, the instructor says the test will begin, and at the very moment he presses a device, the protagonist begins to be transported to the location of the physical test, and the player's subconscious is connected to the system, which begins charging at 5% until it soon reaches a full charge for the situational test for healers. When he opens his eyes, the protagonist realizes that it is unexpected and that the probability of healers passing is low, so he wondered why, until they encountered several accident victims who needed help and understood the situation that the program had created. All these horrors would have been enough to traumatize the protagonist in his past life, and inevitably now the high prices charged by healers made even more sense. But in any case, Suo decided to stop talking and start acting. It is said that the practical test is the most important part of the hunter exam and works according to the chosen class, serving to show how qualified the person is for the job. The test simulation changes every year, and so do the criteria to pass generally. And the challenges are individual or group fights with scores determined by the time and skills used. But the test for healers is a bit special because unlike attack-based classes, they are evaluated on how much they can heal. Obviously, having excellent healing skills makes a difference. However, for most, the amount of sacrifice is more important, so healers must heal people, even at the risk of their own lives. In other words, in this test, the protagonist must die saving others, and even if he dies there, he will remain alive outside. Therefore, before that happens, he must save as many people as he can. However, going against common sense, the protagonist picks up a sword from the ground while wondering if he really has to die after all. He thinks it's too cruel to ask someone who has already died or to die again. As he walks through a post-apocalyptic stage, many cries for help can be heard, and everyone was already in extreme conditions except for one person. Then the hero asked if she was okay. That person was a girl who was desperate to escape, so he immediately assumed he had to keep her alive until the end. Therefore, the hero says that the rescue team is already on the way, and tells her to stay calm because until they arrive, he will certainly take on the role of protecting her. After a while, people start to come out of the capsule, and one of them feels frustrated for going home with not so good results, so he leaves with a rather dejected expression. The staff member responsible for the hunter, in turn, analyzes that the result was 9 minutes and 4 seconds. Therefore, due to the difficulty of the test, she believes that there won't be many who pass. Anyway, she asks Director Shin about the participant she is supervising, and incredibly the man replies that his hunter has already been in the capsule for 30 minutes. Such a result is enough to make the girl run to the place to see it with her own eyes. But even seeing it, she cannot believe the reality of the situation as it is lasting so long. The girl asks if he is a warrior, but Shin says he is a healer. Obviously, the girl doesn't believe it, but the reality is that Suo can be seen using a sword on the digital panel, and besides that, the ability to heal is also clear for both to verify. The girl thinks it's incredible that a healer can fight so much, so she asks if they should fail him if he doesn't die. But the director, who knew that the test was to protect the civilian until the end, disagrees since Suo is meeting the objective. In other words, he was not only right to not abandon the girl, but the protagonist also kept fighting to protect her and healed her whenever he could. That is to say, by continuing to risk his own life to protect her, he meets the conditions, and since the system did not interrupt the test, there was also no reason for them to do so. In any case, it was clear that the best candidate for the test had already been decided, returning to the protagonist's perspective at the moment when one of the monsters jumps toward him. Hungry for human flesh, he waits for the perfect moment until many others come within the range of his sword. All are cut down at once with an extremely swift attack. Despite this, the protagonist believes he must be even faster to achieve his goal, so he unsheathes his sword once more, trying to be quicker than before while slicing through several monsters without wasting time. The protagonist continues the extermination, easily defeating 2 of the mutant dinosaurs, and as the rest pass, he cuts them in mid-air, defeating them before they even touch the ground. Thus, with all this brutality in front of her, even the civilian who was scared before is impressed, and very cleverly, the protagonist masters the unsheathing of the sword, consequently increasing his speed as the system detects the player's movements, allowing for skill mastery. And although the experience gain is low, it is still possible to improve techniques in addition to acquiring some new ones, most of which he already had were raised to rank A, with all the basic swordsmanship skills well developed. The protagonist could now ascend them, and thus be lucky enough to obtain a technique as good as Park's. Therefore, with the system's recognition, he was given the opportunity to register his own skill, and now he was one step away from acquiring his technique called Guardian Sword. Naturally, the protagonist chooses this as the name of his technique, then, recognizing the boy's skill level, the system allows him to create it with his own swordsmanship style. In this way, the Guardian Sword skill of rank S is successfully created. With this, the efficiency and speed of the hero's skill increase by 50%. He also receives an additional 10 attribute points. The system wants him to continue walking the path of the sword and thus also grants him knowledge of swords of rank S, which removes all restrictions related to swords, also adding a 50% compensation effect. In the past, it had taken Blue 10 years to achieve this, but now that he remembered everything, it was infinitely easier. Anyway, the protagonist realizes that the number of monsters has stopped increasing, so the test must be coming to an end. Besides, he wants to get out of there, but to complete the challenge, there are only 2 options. The first is to die, and the second is to kill all the monsters in the area, which, considering the protagonist's personality, it was already obvious that he would choose the second. Shortly after, the instructors had not yet intervened in the protagonist's test, and naturally, to everyone's surprise, he managed to kill all the monsters. Something that had never happened before, especially considering that he also healed the civilian, therefore it was an anime. Among all that didn't even need to check the exam ranking, days later in the office of the team, strategic of the association for the hunter test, one of them believes that Ki-hyun must have been the best candidate, and another agrees that the boy worked very hard. So the person in charge of presenting the results believes that this time Hexagon will come out victorious. However, the data shows that the first place is actually for Suo to further confuse the officials. Hyun, whom they were talking about, doesn't even appear on the list. Naturally, the atmosphere becomes a bit uncomfortable, and in a matter of seconds, the leader of the association calls the hero. Upon answering the call, the protagonist introduces himself then. Cheolmin apologizes for not congratulating his colleague when he received the news and praises him, saying that not only did he get the position, but he was also the best candidate. Very humbly, the hero tries to attribute the credit to the leader, but he knows that Suo deserved it, and only thanks to him, they managed to catch several cheaters. Therefore, the leader of the association believes that this will serve as an example to reinforce the test in the future. Changing the subject, although it's a bit awkward to ask again, Cheolmin asks if Suo will join the association. Then the hero replies that he will join a guild for now, but that his intention remains the same. So Cheolmin thanks him, saying that he will definitely call the protagonist when public recruitment is announced. Then the two say goodbye since it is now lunchtime and both are a bit busy. After hanging up on the other side of the line, Cheolmin doesn't seem very excited but gets up to go eat soon. From the protagonist's perspective, noticing that his colleague's voice was strange, he wonders if something happened. However, the most concerning thing is that now Suo will stop receiving calls, so he answers another. This time, it's Director Kim who, honoring their agreement, informs him that she has already deposited the promised money. But anyway, she quickly asks when the hero will appear in Nexus. After all, with results like these, she assures that he will receive a better deal than anywhere else, so the hero thanks her, and Kim invites him to meet for a better conversation. However, thanking her again, Suo declines, saying that he has a personal commitment today, but he also makes it clear that since he is now a student at Nexus, he will inevitably show up there, which obviously makes the director very excited for when that happens, and without wasting time, makes it clear that his staff should not sign any contracts in the meantime. So while the protagonist feels a bit embarrassed by the happiness that is heard through the speaker, the two say goodbye, and Sujo gets out of the taxi thanking the driver. Since the protagonist passed the exam and obtained his license, in addition to receiving the payment agreed with the director, all that was left now was to acquire some useful resources. At the Don Damoon wholesale market, the protagonist checks off some items on a list on his phone because he has already bought everything he needed except for a certain weapon he is currently looking for at the Dorian Material Store. The boy is not sure if he will find what he is looking for in a place like this, since he intentionally came to an empty store. Anyway, he enters and talks to the elderly man who runs the place with a smile. Sujo says that he recently became a hunter and wants a lightweight and useful weapon. So the seller points to a collection of weapons in the corner of the room, but despite thanking him, it was just a bunch of old stuff. They are all low-level swords with no information, but that doesn't mean they are completely bad. There are cases of swords that were sealed, and later, unleashed immense power swords, like that emit a very notable aura, and in a place like this, there aren't many players who find something like that. That's why the protagonist activates his mana detection, and among the objects, he feels a different energy coming from a spear, which makes him sure that he has found the item he wanted. Shortly after buying that item, our hero leaves the wholesaler, and is very proud knowing that if the seller discovers its value later, he will regret selling it so cheap anyway. The hero decides to start the process. In the first stage, he closes his eyes and concentrates, channeling the energy of the weapon into a flow. His own mana is infused into the weapon, and thus, the seal begins to break until with an uncontrollable release of energy, the subconscious of the spear begins to awaken. Our hero feels very pressured as his mana is being drained, but suddenly the process is interrupted by a sudden collapse that causes the protagonist to throw the spear to the ground and almost faint. A little more of that, and he would have been completely exhausted. Therefore, Sujo realizes that he will need at least 100 points of mana attribute if he wants to awaken it. So although it is not useful now, Sujo understands that he needs to become stronger to use it some time later at the PBS headquarters while a young man is writing. His phone rings, so reporter Choi and Ho answers without bothering to stop working on the other end of the line. The call is for Sujo. Then the young man starts to think about who this person might be until he remembers the young hunter, who came first in this year's association test, and also Sujo reveals that he is the one who cleared the Sindoran portal, which audibly surprises the reporter and unintentionally catches the attention of his colleagues since it's incredible that someone would do that without a license. Anyway, Jin Hyo asks the reason for the boy's sudden contact and to explain himself. The hero says he became interested in the reporter's professional side, known as the Golden Boy, so since many of his achievements will be news in the future, the hero wants to hire Jin Hyo as his exclusive reporter. Although it is somewhat greedy, Jin Hyo says he doesn't feel like being bossed around, but the hero says what he really wants is a partner. Although the reporter doesn't believe him after all, in his opinion, Sujo must be trying to deceive him to increase his own value before joining a guild. Although it is not true, the hero admits he wants fame, but explains that he plans to become a public servant, and when he mentions the association, Jin Hyo naturally doesn't understand the reason for asking for help to make someone famous without the aim of joining a guild. Sounded like a joke anyway. Jesu maintains the idea that he wants to work on the front lines. So Jin Hyo asks again if the boy wants to be a hero or just gain fame, and what the protagonist responds is that he only cares about closing the portals, which the reporter doesn't fully understand. This meeting with the hero seemed very strange to Jin Hyo without giving it much importance. He said he understood what he wanted to say but still decided to reject the offer, saying that he would only write the articles he wanted to write in that case as usual. The hero proposes a bet between the two, understands that he will first have to earn the reporter's trust, and says he will prove it through his skills, and that as a hunter, he plans to conquer the test tower on the same day. Jinjui knew that even for a powerful group, conquering the tower was impossible, but that was exactly the reason why the hero was using the situation to gain his trust. After all, if he succeeded, Jinjui would have to accept being his exclusive reporter. The best player who ever worked in the news field was reporter Jinjui. He is someone who prides himself on coming from a wealthy family and only accepts special requests. But in the past, he worked several times with Suo, changing public opinion. However, due to his ego, he was fired and disappeared, since anywhere a needle that is too sharp can be a danger. Jin Hyo was what you could call that needle, and after getting into a fight, he had to step back, but the hero does not plan to let him disappear again by winning this bet between the two. It will be good to have a promising reporter nearby. And as the condition for victory is so extreme, Jin's ego, Hyo, makes him accept the hero's bet, causing the two to part ways with Suo's final message. Saying that he's heading to conquer the tower, the reporter feels extremely irritated, believing that the hero is crazy. He doesn't understand why these things are being said so suddenly, and ultimately concludes that the boy isn't bad, just really annoyed. Kingwei believes he isn't the type of person to lie in situations like this, but he still feels quite stressed. Despite everything, the reporter doesn't stop his activities there, deciding not to worry about this matter for now. He leaves the office thinking he has nothing to lose. A few minutes later, the challenge tower can be seen with a line of people around just at the entrance. A government employee in charge of managing the place seems bored. Without wasting time, the protagonist asks if he can enter, and since he has a credential, he is allowed in. However, the fact that he's alone draws attention. The employee says that it's not prohibited to enter the tower alone. However, judging by the hero's new license, he suggests it's better to go in groups to avoid getting hurt too much. Although it's good advice for most people, the protagonist rejects it. So, despite having a bad feeling, he agrees to let the boy go, as long as he pays the entrance fee of 70,000 when he's charged. But he also shouts at Suo to come back immediately if he finds any real danger. The challenge tower is practically a home ground. Any player below level 20 can enter freely to level up, like in a public portal. And since he doesn't have much experience yet, this is the best place for the protagonist to level up. He opens the doors to the first challenge and truly enters the interior of the challenge tower. The system of the place warns that it will be possible to exit at any time once surrender is declared. He then materializes his sword, which will serve against the first enemies he will face, and thus begins the challenge of the first floor. At that moment, a large green, liquid monster appears in front of the hero, attacking directly without thinking twice. The monster on the first floor is a slime, and at first glance, Suo was impressed by its size and speed. But in the end, it barely caused any damage, so if it keeps acting like this, it will be a blow to its ego. So the protagonist thinks he should finish it quickly before being pushed back with a precise sword strike to the slime's stone core. A crack forms, although the monster tried to keep advancing to attack. The critical hit to its most sensitive part makes it explode. This makes Suo realize that slimes can be easily destroyed with attacks to the core. Thus, our hero finds himself victorious, but soon notices something that surprises him. Right in front of him, there are now many others to face due to the slime's ability to split. In the end, this is the reason why it is recommended to explore in groups, since most floors have monsters that act in groups. Without wasting time, the protagonist cuts one and moves on to destroy another with a powerful spinning strike at the same time. He uses two smaller monsters as stepping stones to reach the larger one and drives his sword directly into the center of the slime's core, pulls his sword from the largest and quickly thrusts it to hit the next core, causing the monster's structure to collapse from the inside out. He quickly thrusts it to strike the next core, causing the monster's structure to collapse from the inside out. Then, with great agility, he manages to recover the thrown weapon and spins his body in the air to face the next ones. As one of the last ones falls, it comes to attack him, But that's exactly what he wanted, because by grabbing one of the monster's tentacles, his free fall stops, and now he can reach it much more easily. He propels himself upward using the tentacle he has grabbed and uses the monster's body as a base to launch himself forward. Passing over several smaller slimes while taking advantage of this advantageous position, our hero descends, cutting each of them with great skill. He also destroys the core of each remaining monster in the area. With the battle finished, the tower system announces that the first floor has been cleared and asks if the boy wants to face the second one. A purple crystal at the top of the area begins to shine, preparing for the territory change, and since there are 48 floors, he accepts to face the next challenge. The highest record in the challenge tower is floor 48, but that was in his past life. Currently, the record is 29. Both records were achieved in groups, but the tower smartly always adjusts the challenges according to the participants. Therefore, as the number of people increases, the experience gain decreases. Although in a long confrontation, a team is always beneficial, so if someone wants the best record, the standard is to form a team with level 20 hunters. After some time in the tower, the protagonist manages to conquer floor 18, and despite common sense, he believes he doesn't need any of that. Therefore, at the moment the system offers the challenge of floor 19, the protagonist accepts, and the territory begins to change. Floor 19 is different from all the ones he has cleared so far because it has only one monster, which means it is very strong. That's why, without wasting time, the protagonist jumps towards a red light that seems to be his opponent, leaping with all his strength. Determined to overcome the level with a single attack, however, all that red mist dissipates with the appearance of a humanoid monster. The hero does his best to finish it off before it fully manifests. Just when the monster shows its first signs of interaction, the hero smiles because he arrived on time. Then he cuts his opponent in half in a very clever way. Without even allowing a real challenge to occur, floor 19 is cleared. As always, the system asks if the hero wants to face the next floor, but the 20th remains on hold. Asks if the hero wants to face the next floor, but the 20th is on hold. Another thing about floor 19 is that generally monsters disappear once they are eliminated. But that is not the case with this boss, which means something valuable can be extracted from him thanks to his prior knowledge. The hero obtains a fang. This is an item that cannot be used alone because it has its own conditions. Therefore, the mana detection is activated, and upon seeing an energy point on one of the walls of the tower, the protagonist realizes he has found it by inserting the fang into this place that seems to influence space-time. The whole tower begins to tremble with blue flames swirling around a passage. The system announces that a secret portal has been found. This is the subspace that Champion Ho acquired in the tower in the past. It is possible to enter this place after defeating the red monster, but there is something special about subspaces generated by objects, and that special feature is that living beings can also enter and exit freely from the place. As soon as the hero enters, he is surprised by the interior, which resembles a cave. Suddenly, a light, similar to the previous one, begins to shine near Suo's chest, and since the current owner of the subspace is dead, the system asks if the hero wants to become the new owner, to which he agrees. Then, as simple as it seems, he becomes the new owner of the subspace, thus acquiring the S-rank subspace ability, which surprises him. Again, since it is an ability rather than an object, it is said that the subspace changes according to the magical influence of the owner. That's why a light as bright as the sun suddenly appears, and within seconds, the system announces that the subspace has been reconstructed to the hero's joy. The moment he opened his eyes, he realized he had practically gained a new home. The place adapted to the mana and personal taste of Suo. Therefore, the stronger he is, the larger the subspace will be. But what pleases the hero the most is obtaining this before Jean Pianjo, because in the past, the man was a trafficker who caused many problems for the government. Suo, for his part, spent several sleepless nights because of him, but since this time he was the one who acquired it, it won't happen again. This allowed him to kill two birds with one stone. Therefore, what remains for the protagonist now is to move forward. In the news of the day, among the most exclusive is that the hunter Ansuo will enter the Nexus Academy. Therefore, reporter Jin Hui believes that the demand to study there will increase, but since Suo said he would join the association, publishing an article would be bad since Nexus was sure they had him in their guild. Anyway, Jinhui wonders what floor the protagonist is on now, but at that very moment, a message appears saying that floor 30 has been cleared. The record of the challenge tower is broken, and 31 begins to be faced among the nearby people. Everyone starts to gossip about which guild is responsible for that, and suddenly floor 31, which had just begun, is also cleared. Therefore, Jinhui can hardly believe that the person responsible is actually Suo. At first, he thought the protagonist was just bragging, but upon reviewing the information from the tower, it clearly states without restrictions that the name of the player facing floor 32 is Ansu, so the reporter knows he can't let this opportunity pass. At the Nexus headquarters, the director slams her desk, unable to believe what she is hearing. One of the employees says it's possible to see Suo breaking records in real time. Fortunately or unfortunately, Kim realizes that if he wants to recruit him for the guild, he will have to pay much more than he had imagined, so he also decides to contact the president of the association first. Shortly after, the player Ansuho begins to face the challenge on floor 48, and Cheon-min, who came to watch him up close, is impressed by how ridiculously fast the hero is climbing. So, if what he said about joining the association is true, they will have an incredibly talented person on the team. At that moment, the young man's phone starts ringing, and he immediately thinks it must be a call from the vice president. Upon answering the call, a voice screams asking where he is. Then Cheon-min informs them that he is in Panjo in front of the challenge tower. Regarding that, when they ask him about his familiarity level with Sujo, the young man claims to know him a little, so he is ordered to take the protagonist there as soon as possible. Cheon-min, in turn, gets excited and seizes the opportunity to say that he is also recruiting hunters for the association. However, the vice president reveals that he only wants Sujo there for a photo request with the president. So with his enthusiasm completely crushed, the young man almost breaks his phone. Unfortunately, he remembers that these people only care about their own positions, which is why the public sees them as thieves. Furthermore, that's why they can barely recruit members for the association anyway. As a subordinate of the government, Cheon-min knows he will have to take him back. At the challenge tower, with his sword stuck in the ground and extremely exhausted, floor 48 is successfully cleared. Thus, the record for the challenge tower is broken once again, and Sujo achieves a new milestone. With 5 extra attribute points, he is already tired of climbing non-stop, but just looking at his new stats makes all his lethargy disappear. Sujo is happy to have reached level 39, and every time he breaks a record, he gains 5 extra points. Besides, as he already knows, the hero feels like he's playing on a low-level account. Anyway, he ends up distributing the points, and with a more serious expression, he finds himself again in front of that teleportation crystal, ready for the next objective. He begins the challenge of floor 49, instantly bringing the protagonist to face the one he has wanted to confront until now, standing in front of our hero, the most powerful monster in the challenge tower. This is the level 49 tower dragon that demonstrates with a deafening roar. The monster quickly looks at the protagonist as if it were curious, and since its enemy is at level 49, Sujo really feels a bit intimidated even though it is not a pureblood dragon. It is still as strong as one, so Sujo is not sure he can win. But despite being an opponent that will undoubtedly be difficult, the protagonist will not give up before trying after all. That's why he came in the first place. Sujo prepares by gripping his sword tightly as the monster stabilizes, and so both launch at full speed simultaneously. Determined to eliminate each other when they reach a critical distance, the dragon tries to continue its charge, but Sujo dodges with a jump that causes the monster to miss. The protagonist cannot understand how something so large can be so fast, but once again the pressure of its claws against the ground shows that it is preparing to attack. The dragon gathers a large amount of dark energy in its claws, and to the protagonist's misfortune, he begins to be drawn in by the wind pressure. With the protagonist in the air, the monster opens its mouth to swallow him whole, and it really seems like that will be the protagonist's fate. But at the moment the monster closes its mouth, Sujo manages to use his own body to propel himself and lands on the head of the dragon. Saying that it is his turn, he prepares for a theoretically fatal blow, bringing his sword down on the dragon's head with as much force as possible. The attack causes a considerable amount of damage, leaving the monster a bit disoriented. However, the dragon quickly throws the hero away from its body, and as the protagonist begins to reposition himself, both are already facing each other again for a second round. From the beginning, Sujo knew it would be difficult, but he didn't expect he wouldn't even be able to scratch. Anyway, the monster doesn't care about those complaints and starts to press the ground using its weight as an advantage to create cracks that send fragments of stone flying across the ground like in an earthquake. Luckily for the protagonist, although several rocks came towards him, the monster gets confused with its own strategy. With Sujo hitting it, it wonders if the only thing it can do is dodge due to the attribute difference. Incredibly, the dragon is not as strong as a pureblood one, especially because if it were, the hero would have already been found. Furthermore, although it is not a monster of such high level, its body's defense is quite high, which prevents direct attacks. Therefore, what our hero thinks is that he must focus on its weakness, which is the reverse scale. Since this monster has not reached level 100, Sujo believes it should not be able to hide the scale very well, and this is clear when he sees something shining inside the dragon's tail. Even from behind one of the rocks, the inverted scale is visible, so the protagonist decides to act as quickly as possible without wasting time. He jumps vigorously and propels himself with each piece of rubble at high speed until he reaches his target and thrusts the sword with force right into the center of the dragon's inverted scale. Instinctively, the monster panics and a message notifies that the tower's dragon has become enraged, unfortunately for the protagonist. The dragon begins to move non-stop, making an already difficult situation even worse anyway. The hero needs to destroy it quickly and concentrate to not delay any longer. Then with a very clever strategy, he applies twisting force to turn the weapon on the scale, and thus the dragon's pain reaches such a critical level that the tower boss's fear ability is activated. Unfortunately, Sujo is immediately affected by panicking. His muscles freeze and hallucinations appear. The hero tries to use his healing ability, but the negative effect is too strong to neutralize it. The monster roars once more, showcasing its ability, and the protagonist, who is in an advantageous position, now finds himself in an increasingly dangerous one until to finish off the hunter. Once and for all, the monster strikes hard with its tail against the tower's walls, gaining a few seconds when the monster decided to crush him against the wall. Suo called upon his subspace, so just when he was about to be eliminated by that devastating blow that sent debris flying, he was thrown inside through the dimensional portal that connects the worlds, and being in a desperate situation, he knows he must act quickly. So, he invokes some potions he brought just in case. Although he can barely move, using all the strength he has, he opens one and drinks it desperately. It was a purification potion, and soon the effects activated. Thus, the state of panic was neutralized along with the state of hallucination, and finally, the hero is able to collapse face down on the ground to rest a bit. It is extremely convenient that only authorized people can enter the subspace. He had bought those potions in bulk just to be sure, but he never expected to use them. Moreover, the dragon gained more resistance using fear, and since healing didn't work, he'll have to keep fleeing to this place. However, in this way, the hero realizes that he won't be able to do anything, and given that, he decides to try a new strategy, invoking some everyday objects to try to find some use for them in the fight. After a while, the protagonist learns a low-level combination through the memory library and summons a jar, which makes him feel very proud to be able to use formula combinations. He knows that it is possible to combine various types of objects, although many people do not value this possibility. Anyway, he puts socks as well as a guitar and a broom into the jade for the combination. Still, if it weren't for the molecular pulverization class of a famous scientist from the past, he would never have known this. Suddenly, a light appears from the jar, and soon a message congratulates the protagonist for the successful gathering. With that mixture, a ring was created that hides presents, classified as that more called first mumu. And of course, the protagonist gladly received the item. Upon obtaining a new achievement, he gains 10 attribute points, and the reason it became a rank S item was due to the system bonus. There are many ways to categorize an item, so people use the terms original and fake. The first items that appeared were almost all rank S, as is the case with this one. However, a plus sign next to the rank means that the item was affected by the system with some effect, and now able to feel the power in his hands. This item that now belongs to the protagonist is equipped. Our hero can see that it is a good item. In his past life, he hadn't obtained it due to a mad scientist who created the combination first. In any case, with these bonus points, he believes he should soon awaken that thing first. Our hero decides to allocate 4 mana points, which finally allows him to reach milestone number 100. Thus, the boy evolves his mana to red level before reaching level 50, which makes him very proud. He thought it would take longer to happen than if things continue like this. He will soon reach purple level. The attribute color changes to 100 points, but purple can only be reached at 700 anyway. Hero believes he will get there faster than before, and having finished distributing the points, now finally, it is time to summon the ancient spear, and with the weapon he obtained in bulk in his hands, it is also time to awaken it. Without wasting any time, the protagonist begins to insert his hand into the weapon, and once again the seal of the spear starts to break. Just like the previous day, the synchronization begins absorbing a large amount of energy from the hero, however, this time with just a bit more power. He manages to continue the process until finally the absorption is complete. A black mist sweeps the entire subspace and a notification appears, indicating that the seal has been broken, along with the achievement that the consciousness of the spear has been partially awakened. Naturally, the item information starts to change until the Spear of Shadows is revealed, classified as A+, and with this in hand now, there is nothing stopping the protagonist from returning to battle with all his strength. This is one of the treasures of the Lord of Shadows, and it is said to have been made using the bones of a god. It can be summoned at any moment and repaired when broken. So if Champa or John had acquired the subspace Suo, they wouldn't have obtained it. The reason why its creator is called the Lord of Shadows means that he exists somewhere within the portals. The Shadow King used the Shadow Sword, so once again, it avoids a future problem anyway. Now the best he can do is to try it out without wasting time. The protagonist lowers his hand and calls, "Alarm," and then a black light begins to form around the back of his hand until the spear is summoned, accompanied by an extremely intimidating energy. With the handle of the weapon firmly grasped in his hand, the hero praises how useful it is to summon it out of nowhere. Without further delay now, Swell will go for his revenge against the dragon. Floor boss for the hero. It's a shame he can't attack it from the subspace, but since not everything can go as he wants, he states that he will try to deal as much damage as possible while the monster sleeps, so the hero approaches slowly towards the dragon and trying to make as little noise as possible. He positions himself above where it lies. Then he summons the weapon and changing his grip type, he pulls his arm back to throw the spear from right there. The spear travels at high speed, and while the monster sleeps, it is indeed struck on its inverted scale, which is its most sensitive spot, causing it to awaken in panic. Roaring in pain, the hero jumps from the rock where he was, and while the dragon tower rages for having attacked its scale, he uses the fear ability again. But this time, Swao reacts quickly, returning to the subspace, which saves him from the negative effects. The protagonist feels the pressure, and although he returned just in time, he still trembles a bit, but anyway, Swao is excited, knowing that he just needs to keep running and attacking until he defeats the monster. From the protagonist's point of view, the balance isn't breaking as it should, but at least 10% of the dragon's power is gone. The hit-and-run strategy works, so the monster has taken so much damage that it no longer lets its guard down, but for him that won't make a difference now, because this time he's going to attack it head-on. So the protagonist comes out of subspace once again and prepares a fatal blow. He throws the spear at the dragon at high speed. The monster in turn manages to deflect it, but the hero seizes the opportunity to jump over, and since he can summon his weapon at any moment, he ignites it again and lands on the monster's face, stabbing the dragon with the spear's blade. The dragon screams in pain, and the hero is thrown far away, making it very difficult to regain balance. Propelled by immense hatred towards the hunter, the monster lunges to finish him off, and now, without an apparent way to escape, an explosion occurs as the dust settles. The monster tries to find the remains of the protagonist, and since it only has one eye, it struggles to locate him. That's why the hero, who came out completely unscathed, gains an advantage running at high speed through the blind spot until once again he summons his weapon near the balance, visibly desperate. The tower dragon uses the fear ability once again to defend itself, and the hero panics. However, the spear that had been thrown continues its path until it hits the scale and completely destroys it, draining the dragon's energy. Very quickly, the hero uses another purification potion, canceling the effects of fear. Then, while the monster tries to recover, the protagonist jumps on him with his beginner sword in hand, and since the scale was destroyed, he cuts that troublesome dragon completely in one move, making him the first hunter in the world to defeat the challenge tower boss with the tower dragon dead. Floor 49 is cleared and a new record is set, but that no longer mattered, since the tower had been completed, and for this achievement, Suao received 10 additional attribute points. The system began to assess the statistics, and the hero leveled up, gaining more attribute points in this life. The protagonist managed to conquer the challenge tower, something he hadn't done in the past. Anyway, upon reaching level 40, he masters the healing spirit skill. This is a technique that restores energy in an area so that all beings within it will gradually heal without limit. As long as there is a totem as the hero progresses, he will be able to heal people on a large scale. Just like Isabella, after analyzing the protagonist's feats, the system decides to grant a compensation based on his level, giving him rank S Dragon Blood. More surprisingly, this was the ability of a certain player who claimed to have taken it from a mountain dragon. The line Dragon Blood allows the bearer to use the powers of one without being born a dragon and consists of several levels. Seeing this before him, the hero gets very emotional, especially because with this, he could become even stronger than in his past life. As expected, the reward was quite generous. Therefore, the protagonist moves to gather as many resources as possible. And to help with that, the boy summons the Shadow Spear, because when he thrusts it into the ground, the spear reacts to the shadow of the tower's dragon and begins to devour the shadow of the monster until the body of the dragon is completely consumed by the weapon, causing it to disappear completely, which consequently evolves the Shadow Spear to rank S, more due to its Shadow Fang ability. With the increase in magical power, a new part of his consciousness awakens. Then the hero decides to take a look at what changed in his statistics. Apparently, his regeneration is now also rated as S, but what stands out the most is another thing, the S rank ability. Shadow Prison can be used to stun a target and trap it, and while it is active, the target will suffer shadow bleeding damage. In total, 2 new S rank abilities emerged from the evolution, as expected. And as he believes he has done everything he needed, Sojo turns to return. However, he notices that there is a tooth left that did not disappear for some reason. Upon going to the object and analyzing it, it turns out to be rank S, capable of cursing anyone pierced by it. For the hero, it is impressive that this comes from that dragon, because it proves that it truly was a pureblood dragon, as only their objects can be rank S. In the end, Sujo understands why he received its blood, and having gathered enough, he finally decides to return, especially since the hero knows that reporter Jinji must be very excited on the other side outside the tower. A light shines in the crystal until it breaks, announcing the victory of Anzu. Because of this, all players who are challenging other floors are expelled, causing them to fall to the ground like sacks of potatoes. Two of those who were slightly injured by the fall ask who Sujo is, but it becomes easy to see who he is when both see the crowd gathered around the protagonist. Naturally, everyone wants an interview with our hero, with detailed information on how he conquered the tower. But the fact is that the protagonist is tired. He ended up very injured in the tower, and so he will soon rest and recover. In any case, the protagonist's attention is stolen when he notices Jin Huyi reflecting nearby with a defeated expression. So while the reporter tries to process everything, the hero simply appears behind him, making him jump in fright. Suho, for his part, finds the scare amusing since the reporter expected him to appear. Changing the subject, the hero explains that he got rid of the paparazzi just by leaving the place, but that it was thanks to his ring. Anyway, Sujo quickly asks if the reporter doesn't trust him, with his hands outstretched in such a friendly expression. Jinwoo agrees to shake hands with the hero, although he thinks he's crazy. Sujo makes it clear that if the reporter still doesn't trust him, he can find someone else, but Jinju finally admits that if he didn't trust him, he wouldn't have come all the way here, so the two take a taxi to leave before more people arrive. Still, inside the taxi, the association leader calls Sujo Chielman, congratulating the hero for conquering the Tower of Challenges, and apologizes for not speaking with him in person because he couldn't find him. In any case, the hero thanks him for the call, explaining that he fled because he was really tired. In that case, Chiolman asks if the hero needs to be taken somewhere, but Suho declines since he already has someone doing that. Then he just asks if there's anything else the leader wants to say. Chiolman reveals that he wanted him to come to the association. In fact, the association leader confesses that he never expected the Tower of Challenges to be conquered because it functioned as a public portal. But since all that happened, they are conducting an investigation, so the hero simply says that if they need any information, he will be willing to provide it, and in that way, the two say goodbye, agreeing to keep in touch later. Knowing the personalities of the president and the vice president, the protagonist is sure they probably just want a picture. So even though he feels bad for Chielman since he will surely get in trouble, Suho doesn't want to meet those two. Changing the subject, the reporter asks if he can ask a question, and since he hasn't understood yet, he asks why. Suho wants to be a public official given the hero's skills. Jinwoo knows he could join any guild. However, for Suho, no association can be stronger than the state itself. The reporter, on the other hand, believes that the guilds have more fame and power, but although they could organize a coup and even seize power, only in the guilds could they live as heroes because that type of strength would instill fear in the population. Being honest, the protagonist admits that he also wants to eliminate the portals, but since he can't do it, he will just need the support of an organization, which in this case will be the government since it is a place of absolute freedom. Among the players, he knows that the reporter comments that none have such a strong sense of purpose. Getting straight to the point, Jinwoo asks if the guy will take the civil service exam and says it would be a waste to take a level 9 test, as expected. The hero agrees, so Jinwoo asks if it will be level 7, but to his surprise, Sujo says he will take the level 5 test. And since in Korea positions rise as the number approaches 1, Jinwoo finds it bold, so the hero decides to explain the reason to satisfy his colleague's curiosity. But first, he also makes it clear that this is not information to be included in the article. After talking for a while, Jinhua realizes it's a good plan, and that's precisely why the hero asked him not to reveal it anyway. Jinhua says that when the time is right, he will make an official announcement, and since the reporter is going to monopolize the news, he will certainly gain an advantage over the others. Now that they have gotten out of that mess, the reporter asks if Sujo wants to go home since his information has already leaked. Many people are probably outside his house, but the hero makes it clear that just like he escaped before, he will manage to get in. Instead, Jinhua suggests that the hero stay at his house for a while. After all, the guest room is ready and the security is good enough to prevent any intrusions as it is located in the Kaiser and Cheongdam, basically the part of the city where luxury apartments worth billions are sold. Upon entering the place, the interior is so bright that all Sujo can think about is how privileged Jinjue is. To show more, the reporter mentions that the tablet in the room is quite functional. After all, with a simple app, they can buy items or food without leaving home, in addition to having access to an Artable's emergency healing function that can be used immediately. However, this was not something the protagonist needed since he is a healer. Returning to the fact that he is a healer, the reporter starts to ask about that again, then apologizes because he really couldn't believe it when he saw Sujo's information. To him, it makes no sense for a healer to conquer the challenge tower alone, since that class usually climbs with the support of a group. In any case, since he is still on work hours, the young man says he needs to return to the company, so he just asks the hero not to forget what he said before. Shortly after saying goodbye, the protagonist opens the status window. At this moment, he needs to distribute the attribute points he gained in the challenge tower, and since he spent everything on his endurance, he will now increase sensitivity as the 3 main attributes are already in the red zone. Sujo is quite impressed, but now that he has finished distributing the remaining points to sensitivity, he thinks it's better to start looking for cameras inside the apartment because with his current stats, he can find anything in the end. This is not a display of distrust towards the reporter, but rather a precaution because in our hero's opinion being cautious is never too much. After a long time, the hero realizes how difficult it is to search in such a large apartment like this, and in comparison, he thinks it was harder than killing the dragon. The place is bigger than his subspace, but since he didn't find any cameras, he thinks he can finally rest in peace. Suddenly, someone starts sending desperate messages to the perpe hero's cell phone, and it seems that it's not just one person, but several. Since his number has been leaked in this case, our hero will inevitably need a new phone number, but for now, he decides to try the app that the reporter talked about first. After a few minutes using the Sujo program, he was surprised that it actually worked. He grabbed 2 cell phones to set the old one aside. But with the constant calls, changing his number became a priority anyway. 5 hours had already passed since he arrived there, so he finally laid down to rest a bit in the year 200. In the neighborhood of Naigok in District C8, within a heavily guarded place, a glowing square appears out of nowhere. And from within, several masked individuals emerge with their identities protected. They all do their best to remain silent. At one point, one of them drops a bag on the ground, which when opened reveals several hidden bombs quickly. A bomb is placed carefully on one of the shelves in the place, and another is placed in the corner of the wall by a member of the group. Naturally, all the bombs are being placed at critical points within the facility. However, to everyone's surprise, it is at this moment that someone appears saying that they cannot blow up the place. Theoretically, no one was supposed to be in the building that day, and in fact, our hero confirms it was supposed to be empty. However, since he was already there, he suggested with a smile that they have a conversation. One of the masked individuals yells, asking what the boy is doing there, but better than knowing the reason for the group is to escape, so they quickly open the same portal, dimensional as before. But as they tried to run without speaking, the hero throws his shadow spear, hitting the first member of the group, a girl directly in the back in front of her fallen ally. The other masked individuals cannot understand why she collapsed alone. Then one of them kneels, saying he will help her, but he also feels something strange while trying. As they are in a hurry, the partner yells to his teammate to hurry. So the masked one tries to pull the girl again, but with the shadow bond activated, she cannot move. Desperate, the man shouts that something is wrong and they need to try something else. The girl asks to be left behind for a moment, but the man refuses because he seems to have a bond with her. Then, considering his partner's decision, he asks them to take out the hero. Taking his opinion into account, they all agree, changing their escape strategy to combat, but even though he seems to be in danger, the hero just mocks them, saying that it is very difficult to have a conversation with them in an instant. The 3 masked individuals move for a fatal attack, however, without the protagonist needing to move. The attackers simultaneously feel a strange sensation, because to their misfortune, the protagonist's gravitational pressure ability had been activated. With the intruders subdued, Suja asks if they are from Banshee, which is a secret group of terrorists that became quite famous across the country because until they were caught, they caused a lot of trouble with bombs. Naturally, the masked ones wonder how the boy knows their names, so the boy decides to start, revealing the first member whose name is Quack Do, someone who makes a living as a janitor, and is the hardest working member of the team. The second is Seo Kyung, who makes the bombs, but also works as a science teacher at a high school. The next is the delivery guy, Kim Hee-min, who has a skill that allows for easy movement. And finally, the last member of the group is Gu Jong-woo, a student from the Women's University of Korea, and founder of the group, as well as a user of a skill that disables electronic and magical devices. Obviously, the hero says he doesn't need to explain how he knows their identities after all. As expected, from the smartest person in the group, John Woo already knows. Suja asks the girl to tell the others that he is not a bad person, but she asks why she should trust him. Then the hero responds that he knows how to deal with kids like them, including today's attack. There have been 3, and although no civilians were injured, other people's properties were damaged. With the girl's skill, the security cameras were not working, so the police are still trying to investigate what happened. But even knowing all this, the hero still cannot understand how they managed to carry out so many attacks without leaving any trace. That's why Sua asks if the girl wants him to go to their houses and to talk to their families, but the girl obviously asks him to wait. So with the 4 inches the palm of her hand, Sua comments that now they can talk more properly since she doesn't work for the government yet and has no intention of harming them. The hero asks if that's enough. John Gu still doesn't see a reason to believe him, but the protagonist warns that he could simply hand them over to the police. So what they're discussing now is a choice with only 2 options. And being a smart girl, she agrees to listen to what our hero wants. Since it's a bit strange to talk about everything right there, Suja asks to disable the bombs so they can talk somewhere else. In this case, her own hideout, which once again, the hero demonstrates that he knows. First, Suja asks if Jimin can get up and then asks him to open the portal, since it won't be possible to get a taxi from there. Shortly after, the hero comments that it's quite comfortable for a hideout and asks them to freshen up without their masks. However, since they refuse, the protagonist has to turn the request into an order, and not wanting to seem weak, Jong-gu shouts that he took it off because he wanted to while questioning who the protagonist really is. After all, in theory, the boy's hobby was completing portals. With so many questions to ask, Suha doesn't even know where to start. First, the hero explains that he used one of his abilities to know everything and comments that he already knows. The group definitely has some secret skills in this case. What the protagonist wants is simply for them to work for him, to Jong-gu's surprise. Suja asks if the girl read his article where he said he planned to join the association, which was true in this case. Jong-gu yells, asking if the boy came all the way there to recruit them, since he said he wouldn't hand them over. So Suja simply asks him to calm down and listen a bit first. The protagonist says he will take the level 5 test, and that after receiving a promotion. He plans to join the Special Forces Department. Because of their reactions when he mentions his goal, the hero asks them not to look at him like that. He knows the hatred the group has for the Special Department, which is precisely the reason they commit acts of terrorism. That's why the hero explains that he also has reasons similar to theirs, since the portals left him orphaned. At first, the boy thought it was just his bad luck, but then he realized it was a disaster caused by humans. When a portal clears, a safe zone is designated, and that's why many people buy houses. However, the government knew that a portal would reappear in that place and did nothing about it, using the excuse that there were many development projects in the area. At this moment, the hero already knows who was responsible, and that's why he wants to become the leader of the special department, to make those people pay. The special forces are the most powerful part of the Hunters Association, capable of influencing other departments and carrying out investigations. Among all this regarding the revenge of the Four, the hero also wants to help but will need someone to act for him from the shadows. Jinhua in turn comments that there is no guarantee the boy passes the level 5 test. Then Sujo says they can decide after he passes, but makes it clear that if they commit any act in the meantime, he will personally report them. So the conversation ends here. The hero knows that everyone must be feeling embarrassed. Now, since Banshee is an organization that never revealed its identity, they acted so intelligently that it was hard for Sujo to catch them in his past life. But he learned something in his past life while interrogating them, and that was that they were like a protagonist, but vented their hatred in another way by following the path of crime. If someone had helped them before, they certainly wouldn't have done it. So Sujo committed to fixing things before they sank back in. At this moment, the hero already knows that regardless of the time, Janjua will accept the offer. The conditions are harsh, but she will trust in his ability. Then the Comset protagonist asks them to think it over and make the best decision possible sometime later. In the Hunters Association of Korea, the team leader Cheol-min begins to receive some complaints from his superior, who is the vice president. He says that apologies won't mean anything because the president himself made the request. This time, the politician says he will let it slide, but threatens with severe punishment if Suho does not show up there, and that's how Cheol-min is fired from the vice president's office after being scolded for hours. He considers quitting everything and joining a guild, but he calms down a bit, remembering that he didn't join the association for nothing. Suddenly, someone grabs the boy's neck and quickly greets him with a hug, asking how the leader is doing. Unfortunately, for the boy, he encounters this person at the same moment. He is angry. This person is the leader of the special department named Pai Sung-yu. Sung-yu comments that it shouldn't be difficult to bring just one person there. After all, if they accuse him of something and force him to come, they can just apologize later. Obviously, Cheol-min doesn't fully understand what the other leader is saying. So to explain better, Sung-yu suggests adding to the invitation that the president wants to see Suho because he is being investigated. Since he heard that the boy also wants to join the association, Sung-yu believes it will benefit everyone. Dismissing what he considers a weird joke, Cheol-min comments that something bad could happen. Then Sung-yu says that every time he sees Cheol-min, he considers him a good person, but also a bit too naive to be an officer who fears a mere hunter. So Cheol-min pretends to agree under pressure. Sung-yu says that his job is to instill fear in hunters so they obey orders. So, since the boy is a leader, Sung-yu says he should start acting like one. After all, there are sometimes better ways to resolve complicated situations. Anyway, the special department officer says he will always be available when Cheol-min needs him, and so the two say goodbye, but despite the friendly appearance, the hero's friend thinks of that officer as someone repugnant. At first, he had a good opinion of him since he was part of the association, but over time, Sung-yu really proved to be quite a terrifying person with a lot of knowledge. Anyway, the boy leaves work to rest a bit for now, but as soon as he starts going down the stairs, he stops on a step to sit and reflect a little about recent events when he met the protagonist. It was clear that he really wanted to help the association, but suddenly he became cold, like in his last call. Chio-min thinks that he must be receiving many offers from guilds now, which is inevitable, so he really wishes he knew what he is thinking. In a slightly more distant place, the protagonist's taxi arrives and he gets out, as always ready for his next action. Looking at his hand, that invisible ring begins to shine, activating the colorless loneliness, which is an ability of the same object. As soon as he got the first item, Momu, the protagonist started using it like crazy, and now it will be the same, because he is ready for his next target, which is right ahead in the blood center of Soul with a powerful jump. He jumps over the security walls of the center, entering with great ease. Then as he walks, silently, the boy observes his surroundings, believing he must be close while activating the detection of mana. He can track a bloody red energy from afar, normally a portal. Emits a large amount of magical power, so no matter how well hidden it is, as long as he can sense it, and this, in particular, has just opened a crack between the two worlds. A secret portal is usually hidden and only appears when certain conditions are met. Logically, each portal has different conditions, but in this case, the protagonist invokes a knife from his inventory and makes a small cut on his hand. Without thinking twice, after all, the condition of this portal requires a certain amount of infused blood, and at the moment, the portal absorbs the protagonist's fluids. The conditions are met. Indeed, what makes him proud? This way, the secret portal opens, granting the boy 5 attribute points for the achievement. And now, with the portal information loaded, this blood portal is activated. At some point after entering that place, the hero uses the power of light and realizes he is in a cave. Then he becomes curious to go further inside. Along the way, a liquid falls on the protagonist's head, catching his attention for looking like some kind of water. However, when he looks up, he sees several small red eyes, making it clear that it is saliva from level 63 vampire bats. Without wasting time, they all charge in unison to attack the hero, and he comments that the party is about to begin. A new ability called Intimidation activates, generating a wave of power, and thus all those monsters trying to attack the hero are easily defeated by his presence. One of them, that is still alive, is already on the ground in pain. So to finish him off, the protagonist approaches and using his shadow spear, activates the shadow bind, plunging the spear into the ground, creating a wave of dark energy throughout the area, which causes all those bodies to be consumed in a few seconds by the power of the weapon, leaving the place clean. Nothing is better than Intimidation for weak enemies because, as an S-rank ability, it does not depend on the level difference. Normally people focus on 1 or 2 attributes, but since the hero knows exactly how the system works, he decides to pay attention to all of them as he levels up to 45.5 points in each red attribute. The hero, for his part, thinks it was too much just for bad vampire, so he checks the battle log and is surprised. After all, among the bats, there were also slimes, but of blood that were probably hiding among the vampire bats on the ceiling when he accidentally exterminated them. Even though it is a great skill, he just didn't enjoy the fight that much. But he also knows that the higher the monster's level, the more resistant they become to the pressure caused by intimidation. So the protagonist keeps walking until he finally stops, in front of the boss door, where the main event of the party will take place, and without even having to think much, opens the doors and enters the boss room fearlessly. The inside of the place is completely vast, surrounded by crimson light. At one point, the protagonist announces that the monster can come out of its hiding place now. Red eyes shine in the shadows. From one corner of the room, then the protagonist summons his beginner sword, and defends himself from a charge of a giant bat trying to finish him off. The most unexpected thing for the hero is the fact that the boss is a giant vampire bat, but still, he counterattacks with a slash to the monster's wings, sending it flying. To the hero's surprise, suddenly he feels something approaching, and turning around he sees a giant blood slime attacking at high speed, which forces the protagonist to dodge just in time. In front of these two, it is clear that they are certainly not the boss, but they are also not ordinary monsters. One is a 100-year-old bat level 72, and the other a blood golem of the same level. Despite that, the hero believes they are too weak to be a real challenge, so the three of them approach for a confrontation, and while the golem faces the protagonist in close combat, the bat tries to flank him using its flying ability as an advantage. However, at the right moment, the protagonist counters with a slash and also spins, striking the golem in 2 places. Additionally, while stabilizing on the ground, he takes advantage of the monster's confusion from its wounds to use all his power and eliminate both at once with a slash explosive that sends everything it touches flying through the air. So, as the debris from the explosion settles, the dust begins to clear, and Suo gets a bit excited, thinking it's a victory, but quickly returns to reality due to a very important fact he had forgotten. Both the 100-year-old bat and the blood golem had the power to resurrect whenever they wanted. The destruction increases as the fight continues between the protagonists and the 2 monsters in the boss room. Besides being able to resurrect, since they are blood monsters, physical attacks don't work very well, which is why the hero thinks he will have to use that. Suddenly, his hand begins to glow, and as the monsters approach, a new sword materializes. Naturally, the clash causes an even stronger explosion than the previous one. However, when the dust settles, the monsters seem worried, because the bat starts to bleed after being struck in a critical area, and the same happens with the golem. Before, no matter how much he cut, he wasn't doing any damage, but in the end, they still have a weakness against blessed silver swords with divine attributes. And as a healer, what the protagonist knows best is how to manipulate divine power. A strong light is created when Suo channels this energy into the sword, and as it courses through the monster's body, its end comes swiftly. That's why the hero steps on the defeated bat and mocks how easy it was to defeat it, turning to the blood golem and asking, with a smile, if he should also use divine power on him. The golem becomes furious more than ever and charges to avenge his companion. However, what he didn't expect was that now the protagonist could defeat him much more easily than before, and just like the other one. With a single blow, the blood golem is defeated, which makes the hero truly appreciate this attribute as a healer. Using divine enchantment becomes quite useful when enchanting a silver weapon with that power. Suo creates the perfect weapon to deal damage to the monsters in this place. Suddenly, an intimidating presence is felt behind the protagonist, and he realizes that the boss of this secret portal is finally going to appear, taking slow steps. The boss remembers that the boy not only invaded the place but also killed his subordinates, calling the hero a rude creature, saying that the boy doesn't know his place. Then the cursed prince of level 76 orders him to kneel and confess his sins, but the hero asks what would happen if he says that the reason he came was actually to find her. In response, the vampire attacks, claiming that the protagonist is too arrogant. In the first strike, our hero manages to defend himself, and although he is thrown backward, he dissipates the magic, ending with a mocking question, asking if his majesty is done. Furious at the intruder, the vampire changes his strategy and creates a blood sphere, and with it in hand, he thinks the boy won't keep talking afterwards. Unexpectedly, instead of throwing it at the protagonist, he infuses all the blood into the ground, then sees the blood rise around the protagonist. In an instant, these are blood curtains that block the opponent's vision, and given that the entire room is filled with the vampire's energy, the hero cannot know where he is anyway. So, he thinks it's better to focus since he doesn't know where his enemy will attack from, so paying attention to every movement in the hall, the hero turns around when he feels something and manages to defend himself even from behind. The prince indignantly asks how the boy's reaction was so fast, but he just mocks again, saying he has good reflexes. Between the protagonist's sword cuts, the vampire creates huge blood claws. Then, when he strikes, the hero thinks he's about to win, but the prince immediately shatters that expectation, revealing that something like that doesn't work on him. And now it's his turn to mock the protagonist's naivety. He begins to transform, and using his ability called Blood Cry, he prepares to exterminate the intruder once and for all. He starts to be wounded by some projectiles flying toward him, so he changes his grip, and by stabbing his sword into the ground, he activates one of his large-scale healing abilities. As the vampire, as a demon, he is forced to retreat to avoid suffering the purification effect. The prince praises the ability, saying it's impressive but asks what Suo did, and more than that, he asks where the hero's wounds are. With maximum pleasure in his words, the hero reveals that he is actually a healer and sarcastically asks if he should also heal the vampire, who now doesn't even know how he's bleeding. But to resolve that curiosity, the hero says he will show him how he did it by doing it again. The solitary prince grows increasingly irritated by the audacity of the intruder, and in that fury, he lashes out in an attempt to unleash everything at once. The two start exchanging blows at high speed, but with the protagonist's dual grip, he can defend himself and counterattack as soon as he inflicts a small amount of damage. Suo defends himself, and then the vampire blocks a sword without giving up. The vampire continues trying to attack, causing a clash of power between the two, until at a certain moment he smiles, having found an opening, and this way he makes cuts. In a time span shorter than a blink, the protagonist is apparently finished off by the monster, at least in the vampire's mind, because the reason Suo disappeared was that he had run to the prince's back, and in that advantageous position, he was able to attack with both swords at the same time, while the opponent coughs up blood. The hero does not give him time to recover and approaches again. The monster's anger grows to an absurd level to the point that it gathers strength for one last attempt to finish off the hero, creating an even bloodier battle. The prince shouts furiously for the intruder to die, but Suo uses all his resistance to endure the attack until the energy soon dissipates. Thus, the dust begins to settle, and with both of their backs turned, the first to fall is the lonely prince. In response, our hero slowly approaches the body of his enemy and touches him, asking if the prince is still alive. It really wasn't possible that he had died just from that, and unfortunately, the still conscious head was able to bite the hero's arm. At first, it seems hilarious to him how naive Suo was for getting so close, and he realizes that the boy will soon become his servant. In response, the protagonist does not pay much attention, and simply tosses the head away in disgust. However, the conversion process begins, sending the boy to the ground from blood loss. The hero's mind begins to become a bit confused along with a growing thirst. Then the prince says it's too late, but Suo tells him to shut up. In no time, the transformation into a vampire reaches the threshold of 42%. Suo knows he needs to hold on until the process advances so that at the final stage, he can purify himself with holy water. At 50% transformation, the moment arrives when the first vampire characteristics appear. Then the hero retrieves holy water potions from his inventory. But before he can purify himself, they break right in the palm of his hand, and with that, the vampire laughs again. This time, saying that since the place is his, he can destroy anything within it. The protagonist really did not expect his opponent to be so cunning. Visibly, the hallways had already been restored, and maybe those servants were being resurrected. Meanwhile, the transformation only progresses, so the prince says that his should just accept it. At this stage, the boy's blood begins to become contaminated, but unlike what the vampire says, the hero believes there is still a way. His mind starts to become confused, but with the conditions unlocked for the dragon blood met, the first being reaching level 50 and the second having his life threatened both physically and mentally, the abilities, dragon armor and dragon skin of rank S are immediately incorporated, stopping the transformation and purifying the blood. With all conditions for the release of dragon blood now met, the dragon's power is unlocked, along with the armor, granting those two previously mentioned abilities as the effect of the dragon armor activates. Instantly, the transformation was halted, thanks to the effect of the dragon armor. But this contaminated blood also brought an unknown power at this moment. The protagonist realizes that his body feels lighter. It was good for him to have unlocked this ability now. More than at any other time, the dragon power was also rank S and capable of turning any type of corruption into power. Evolutionary, the unlocked conditions were never revealed to the public, but the player, known as the demonic dragon, once shared them. The transformation made a change and the system recognized it as a risk, but as the blood was purified, it absorbed that corruption. Checking what he received, the ability of rank F appears in a sealed state. Then the hero wonders what the point is of having it if he can't use it. He at least wanted the racial effects, but apparently, it's not possible to use dragon blood and vampire blood at the same time. Anyway, other useful abilities appeared like vampire blood, blood jade, and blood weapon. All of them are rank A, and the blood weapon in particular is a rare ability used only by noble vampires. Besides that, as it requires blood to use, the hero will have to hunt a lot. The first stage is to kill a monster, and the second is to use the ability to transform it into jade, which will ultimately increase the level of the spear with the Shadow Fang. Anyway, the protagonist shouts at the vampire to stop making noise because he doesn't even understand what the prince is saying. Who is still alive, can't understand how the hero is still okay. He begins to degrade. Meanwhile, his anxiously awaits phase 2. Without having to wait long, a message appears saying the cursed prince laments his own fate. With that, the monster's power increases considerably, and suddenly, some noises begin to be heard, along with drops of blood falling from the ceiling that soon turn into a vast Red Sea, in which the lonely prince makes his return in a state of fury. The vampire declares he will eliminate the boy for acting superior. And now the enraged cursed prince level 80 prepares to send the hero to the abyss while the protagonist gets ready for an attack. The blood begins to circulate through the vampire's body, and soon all the liquid gathers on the back of the monster, forming huge wings and sharp claws. By the magical power released with a scream, the hero realizes that the prince is indeed different now. The monster prepares a sphere of blood surrounded by dark magic and launches it in an explosion towards our hero. Mercilessly, the protagonist, receiving the full impact head-on, feels a bit pressured, especially because the explosion is like a military-grade bomb. With that, the vampire believes the fight is over, but the hero appears behind him. Unfortunately, his wings defend him, making the hero question if he has also become smarter, which obviously infuriates the monster even more. Anyway, it was a fact that the prince had become stronger, but without wanting to talk, the vampire launched into the attack, using his claws and his new power to change the course with several consecutive attacks against his defenses. The protagonist feels increasingly exhausted. With a proud smile, the hero activates his holy power, thinking that victory is near. However, both swords are broken in half, and the vampire advances, saying that power is nothing to him. The hero barely dodges a potentially lethal blow with acrobatics. The vampire's feat of destroying a sword with holy power surprises Suo, and since that is the case, he decides to use his own nearby blood to create a new weapon, which to the surprise of the lonely prince is a blood weapon, just like his. More furious than ever, the vampire screams to get that ability back, but the protagonist stands firm, and by successfully invoking divine power in that demonic weapon, he begins to cut the prince's attacks, leaving him unable to react. The strength of the blood sword adjusts to the user's power. And with that, Suo believes he can win, then provokes the vampire, telling him to come and retrieve his weapon. Finally, the prince loses control again and advances with pure murderous intent to exterminate the hero. Unexpectedly, what he uses to defend himself is a kind of blood shield. With a smile, the hero asks why the vampire looks so surprised. When he knows that the ability can change shape, without further ado, he rematerializes his sword, thus increasing his strength with a spin in the air, and strikes the vampire with a precise blow in the blink of an eye. After all that chaos, the protagonist is visibly exhausted, and although his head is on the ground, the monster changes his expression from anger to mocking, believing he cannot be killed. But in response, the hero simply kicks the vampire's head as if it were a soccer ball. Calling him annoying, he invokes his shadow spear, stating that he will take care of him before he gets angry again. All the vampire says is that he will surely take revenge, but the hero drives the spear into the ground beside him, activating the Shadow Fang, generating black chains that prevent the vampire from moving. Thus, the hero gets a little closer, and when the monster asks what's happening to him, he tells her to shut up. The vampire blood ability activates, and the extracted blood starts transforming into blood jade. The vampire tries to scream for the dirty hands of the hero to get off him, but is ignored. It is possible to see how much blood the ability consumes, and apparently the jade is only visible to its owner. Before, the person known as the Bloodmaster was simply an employee of the Emma Center who worked as a nurse, accidentally entered the hidden blood portal there, and as soon as he arrived at the boss's room, he transformed into a vampire. In theory, the boy should have died, because when the transformation is complete, the system sees the player as a monster and closes the portal. However, as a nurse, he had healing abilities to neutralize the transformation, and all his skills at that moment were recreated as vampire skills. He practically reborn with a new power, and after defeating the cursed prince, closed the portal. From that moment, this player was recognized as the worst villain on the land, called the Bloody Master. In the end, as the protagonist was a prosecutor, this information somehow came into his hands. That's why he already knew everything from the transformation to the blood weapon. At this moment, the vampire keeps screaming that he will take revenge for all this humiliation. However, the hero simply tells him to try, because now that the monster has dry blood, he will no longer be able to react. The Shadow Spear reacts to the shadow of the cursed prince, and begins to devour his essence until upon finishing he becomes even stronger. By successfully completing the absorption process of the cursed prince, the secret portal concludes. The system declares as MVP to him, and although he receives several bonuses for his feat, the exit portal is created at the end of that day. He also realized how powerful dragons were. It became clear that no matter how strong a vampire was, it could not compare to a dragon. Still, the hero feels sorry for not having gained all the vampire's power, but it's at that moment when the system alert appears. The system analyzes the boy's talent in detail and decides that he deserves a reward. In addition to 10 extra attribute points, the hero receives the new blood that is basically capable of harmoniously accepting all types, even for him who came from the past. It was amazing. After all, such a power not only allows the mixing of races, but absorbs them in the purest way. It's like winning the lottery. Without delay, the vampire seal breaks thanks to the effect of the new blood, thus evolving to rank S. And the original vampire ability appears, which is only given to those of the royal lineage, although the hero had never heard of it. This is a rank S ability, while the Bloodmaster had only obtained a rank A ability. Even those born as vampires do not possess something with the adjective original. So the protagonist, he thinks it must be a side effect of the new blood. He thought he could only acquire some abilities, but in the end, it turned out better than expected. And that also meant that unplanned things could happen in any case. The boy decides to stop prolonging things and move on to visit the academy, Nexus, where he will study for a while later. Inside the headquarters of the great corporation Nexus, the director walks down a hallway. With our top executives, this is because everyone is there to report to a boss who is waiting for them. He announces that the hunter Suo will attend the next day to visit the guild. Then the president of the Nexus guild, named by Don Huke, says they need to prepare since there is still a possibility that the boy might change his mind later that night. At some point later, at the reporter's house where Suo is staying, he enters the place and calls Jinwei, who for some reason is lying on the sofa. As soon as the hero asks why he is sleeping like that, the reporter wakes up. He summarizes that Suo conquered the challenge tower and that he is now his roommate. So with 2 drinks in hand, the boy says he waited for them to celebrate together, but when he arrived, Suo had gone out, so he accidentally fell asleep while waiting for him. In this case, the hero warns that it will be difficult to take care of him because things like this will happen all the time. Changing the subject, although it is late, the protagonist asks if they are going to drink, and since that is precisely the reason he is there, Jinwei says yes. Shortly after, Suo says he really liked the recommendation of that app. He knew the guy was doing well with his articles, but he didn't know he was that rich. Jinwoo in turn explains that that's what you get for being the child of someone important. And since the hero's secret was revealed, he admits that he is actually the youngest son of the president of the Daesung group. He also reveals that all his siblings have different mothers, as if the mothers were his father's lovers. Therefore, Jinwoo is an illegitimate son, and that's why it's a secret he hasn't even told his coworkers. When asked about it, the reporter clarifies that his job is more like a hobby. After all, he has already received many things from his father but not shares, and he has also declined to work in any of his father's companies. After all, the boy believes he is good at writing, but terrible at managing in the hero's opinion. Jinwoo does well as a journalist, which embarrasses him and also leads him to praise Suo's talent as a hunter in a toast between the two. The next day at dawn, the protagonist walks yawning a lot until he is greeted in the kitchen by the reporter, who is already ready to work despite it being the weekend. The hero commented that if he had known, he wouldn't have let the boy drink, but Jinwoo liked it anyway. His question if there is any article about him in preparation, but the boy says it's not possible to live just doing that. Changing the subject, Jin Flees hears about the hero who is going to pass by the Nexus headquarters today, but the fact that the protagonist reveals he reached level 51 last night makes the reporter spit out his drink. Surprisingly, the protagonist was at level 40 just a day ago when he left the challenge tower. Then the reporter comments, somewhat confused, that the more he knows, the less he understands anyway. He thinks for a moment, looking at Suo, and quickly tells the boy to dress up in case he wants to make a good impression. The hero, in turn, says he is fine as he is, but Jin Huyi insists that he borrow a suit and make a good impression. He also makes it clear that he will lend him one of his cars since Suo cannot expose himself like that, as they agreed. Shortly after, in a convertible, the protagonist parked in front of the Nexus headquarters, naturally surprising everyone waiting there. Without wasting time, Suo got out of the car in a stylish outfit worthy of a great hunter, which in the end even convinced him that he had managed to make a good impression inside the Nexus headquarters. President Biden Hugh introduces himself, and the hero greets him, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. Getting straight to the point, since Suo has evolved a lot in recent days, they were worried he might change his mind since he wanted to be an official. But to everyone's surprise, the hero stated that this was still his main goal, given that Don Hugo asks why he wants to join a private guild. Honestly, the hero responds that joining the Korean Association is easier, and that he plans to take the level 5 civil service exam, so he wants to build his resume with a major guild in a kind of psychological game to avoid being intimidated in the association. This way, Suo's intention with Nexus becomes clear, and in his opinion, everyone wins because as long as he is there, he guarantees to do his best. Don Hyuk understands the hero's goal but says he has a question. Initially, when the boy was just a stranger, he proposed a deal saying they would need him a lot. Everyone thought it would be a great opportunity, considering how things had been in recent years, but now that all the guilds are also eager to have him, the president wonders why Suo still wants Nexus Don. Hugh clarifies that he is aware of the talent that Suo has, but still does not understand his true goal. Therefore, from the president's point of view, if they accept such a strange offer, they will seem domesticated, and because of that, even if it's Suo, they will have to reject in this case. With a good laugh, the protagonist replies that it's something personal, recalling a certain speech from the president. Also, although he doesn't know much about the others, Suwa is aware that Nexus is the corporation most committed to contributing to the nation. In the past, when the portal disaster occurred, the guild that helped the most with the rescue was this one. That's why the protagonist trusted those words. So, wanting to help people, he believed there was no better place, and also stated that it would be even better if they could continue working together after he joins the association, which Don Hugo approved. Changing the subject, the president asks if the hero really needs to join the association, since it would be much easier to contribute with him in the guild. Suhua agrees, but says that if he really wants to achieve his goal, he will need to enter portals that others cannot. For example, those classified by the government as high risk, the so-called sealed portals. Suhua wants to go further and eliminate all 5 high-risk gates until he becomes a public official. All the portals he cleans will be marked with the name of the Nexus Guild, and with that, he convinces himself that things can change drastically. Especially since the hero wants Nexus to reach the top. Don Hugh asks why that is, since the boy is already fulfilling it without his help. But to respond, the hero remembers that he said he would do everything possible while he was there, so besides cleaning portals, he also wants to recruit and train new members. Very surprised, the director asks if any of the members caught the boy's attention, and soon Suhua responds that she is talking about Kang Dae-hyun. In this case, she asks if he isn't the guy who just changed his main weapon, but the hero says it was he who made that recommendation, which only makes the director even more excited. Suhua comments that she made the recommendation based on serious analysis and guarantees that Dae-hyun is better than before, which Kim inevitably has to agree since it is a fact according to the analysis they had. Everyone believed it was impossible for Dae-hyun to pass the tests, but in the end, he finished in second place. Therefore, even though it's a bit embarrassing to say it, she thanks him, further boosting the hero's ego. Interrupting the two, a person comments that if the offer is real, it will be very good. However, the third member at the table makes it clear that he still has one more question, so while the hero is there, he plans to enter the sealed portals. But since the government manages them personally, it's difficult even for guilds to obtain authorization. Then the guy asks how the protagonist plans to obtain the authorization on his own, but for that, Suhua simply suggests to continue the meeting when he brings the approval in hand. In fact, the hero comments that he will demonstrate his determination by entering one of them. Therefore, a bit worried. The boy comments that Suhua always gives options that are hard to refuse, but for the hero, that distrust is normal since he is still just a rookie who caught the public's attention. So even though he isn't even at level 100 yet, he claims he will get rid of that title and become a true professional. And to do so, he will prove his worth by himself, which makes Don Hugh think very well of the proposal, agreeing to proceed after completing a sealed portal right after the hero's departure. The same guy from before who was the president's secretary was called to prepare all the necessary documents for the recruitment of Suhua, along with the formation of a special team just for him. Obviously, the secretary questioned this since the agreement was to wait until they conquered the first portal, but Don Hugh simply replies that it doesn't matter, because he wants to show that he trusts him by preparing everything in advance since he is sure that Suhua will deliver on his word. And although the secretary isn't so sure, both can clearly see the hero's eyes filled with confidence that didn't waver for a second. In the Korea Hunters Association, among the offices of public officials, one in particular is not having a very good day. Overwhelmed by stress, Cheolman keeps trying to come up with a way to involve Suhua despite his refusal. If they try to invite him under the pretense of giving an award, the group leader knows the hero will refuse. Besides, something like that won't be enough, since he will need to be friendlier than just a formal acknowledgement. Even with few options left, Cheolman doesn't want to resort to the Special Forces leader's strategy. Then the headache starts to become unbearable from thinking so hard about how to solve this until suddenly the boy's phone rings with a number unknown from his network of contacts. Out of curiosity, Cheolman answers, identifying himself as the leader of Team 1 from the Hunters Association, and to his surprise, the voice he hears is precisely that of the protagonist. But the surprise doesn't end there, as something is said over the phone that leaves Cheolman euphoric. Sometime later, the two meet at a restaurant that Suhua considers serves the best pork, and to explain how she knows the place, she gives the excuse that she used to eat there when she worked nearby. Changing the subject, Cheolman comments on how surprised he was by the unknown call. Then the hero explains that he changed his number, so from now on, this is his new official one. Cheolman, in turn, thanks him for getting in touch, as he thought they would never speak again. Having said that, the hero asks if the boy got into some kind of trouble, like the association pressuring the leader to bring him in. Cheolman's expression completely changes and he asks how he knows. Suhua explains that after completing the challenge tower the other day, Suhua wondered why the guy wanted him so much in the association, but normally, when something like that happens, they only ask for some information instead of bringing the person to headquarters. In the end, Suhua, he discovered that the superiors had the habit of calling people just to take pictures. But even though it was somewhat embarrassing, the hero said it was fine and commented that Cheolman could have been honest with him since it wasn't a big deal. The leader apologized, but the hero said there was no need for that, since his true intention was to thank him. In cases like this, Sujo knows that they often falsely accuse someone to force them to show up, but Cheolman didn't follow that plan, and that's exactly why. Sujo decided to come to the association only now since he wanted to thank him personally, and to build a good relationship with the superiors at the same time. In this case, Sujo asks when they can go, leaving Cheolman. Desperate but not wasting any time, the leader seizes the opportunity and says he will schedule it for right after lunch. After a while at the Korea Hunters Association, the iconic photo was indeed taken. The president of the association, Yang Kyung-won, says it's an honor to take a photo with such a busy hunter as Sujo, and Vice President Park Kyuman agreed as well, saying it was hard to believe the boy's age when he saw him. In any case, Sujo reacts politely, saying the honor is all his, but behind that mask, his true desire was to vomit. Changing the subject, the president asks if Sujo really intends to join the Korea Hunters Association, and as he said in the interview, the hero reaffirms his dream of becoming a public servant. To explain himself, he remembers that he was orphaned because of the portals, so his greatest wish is to eliminate them all. But the reason Sujo didn't reveal was that he also couldn't stand seeing people like Kim Won there. This man held the position 5 times until he was forced to resign, but this time the hero plans to eliminate him as soon as possible. Still, the one who irritated the protagonist the most was the one who had just praised him. Vice President Park Yuman starts to comment on how the boy doesn't care about material goods and still intends to join the association, and without a hint of shame, he says that Sujo's deceased parents must be proud of him in heaven. Following the good neighbor policy, the boy thanks him, but he knows it was probably him who dragged him there since he's practically a flatterer of the president. It's thanks to those two that many suffered from the bureaucracy behind the portals in the past. But this time, the hero believes he won't let that happen again. Changing the subject, Cumin asks which department the hero wants to join, and after thinking about it a bit, he says he wants to enter the portal department. It is thanks to those two that many suffered from the bureaucracy behind the portals in the past. But this time, the hero believes he will not let that happen again. Changing the subject, Cumin asks which department the hero wants to join, and after thinking about it a bit, he says he wants to enter the portal department. It is said that unlike private guilds, they have priority in the portals and how they inspect them. First, they can also attack them for the president. It is a surprise that the hero wants to be in the most dangerous place, but the vice president thinks Sujo could be perfect there. In this case, the president says they should show a symbol of gratitude to Sujo, as he wants so much to eliminate the portals. Kaimon thinks it is a good idea to give him some, which Chiolman agrees with, but not without questioning it, as only the sealed and difficult ones were left, but that was exactly what the protagonist was looking for there. So with an enthusiastic speech, he says they need to close those portals that are a threat to society. Chiolman tries to shout, interrupting the excitement of the two, but at that moment, the president calls his attention, who asks what the problem is if they just want to give a gift to Sujo. Just the look from Kim Won, it is enough to silence the leader of Team 1, so Chiolman gives up protesting and says he will make the preparations. Thus, Kim Won becomes friendly again with the hero, wishing him good luck on his mission, and guarantees that when he finishes, he will give an interview giving all the credit to Sujo and offering all possible support. Chiolman remained distressed by how his superiors distributed sealed portals as if they were toys, and that's why he hates the unawakened, because they don't know what a portal is and how many lives had to be lost for one to be considered sealed. Just the fact that they want to send such a valuable hunter to a hunter's graveyard enrages Chiolman, and the hero knows very well how his colleague feels. However, since the president and his vice only care about money, they don't care about casualties as long as the portals are closed. Changing the subject, Kim Won asks what level of civil service exams Sujo plans to take, and without hesitation, the hero replies that he will take the level 5 exam, even though it's difficult. Sujo replies that only at that level can he make a difference, and explains that this is the reason to join a guild. Cumin comments that it's good to have experienced colleagues beforehand, but since guilds usually don't make temporary contracts, that's why Sujo still doubts having time to gain more experience, and if there's someone who can understand his situation, he says he will sign a temporary contract until the public exam. As the president thought it was a good idea for Sujo, it certainly won't be bad to join Nexus, and with this opportunity, he will finally be able to form a relationship between the two corporations. Suddenly, too, everyone's surprised, the leader of the association team, Pai Sang-yeol, appears at the door and soon enters, asking if his superiors are eating something delicious in secret gen, until he inevitably encounters the presence of the much-talked-about prodigy hunter. Sitting on the sofa in the room, a devilish smile spreads across Sang-yeol's face, and it's evident that the man is quite excited for whatever may come next. Unexpectedly, Sang-yeol decides to return another time, but the president asks him to stay and introduce himself, which was exactly what he wanted without wasting time. He explains that the guest is the hunter who cleared the challenge tower. Then Sang-yeol remembers everything with great enthusiasm, and soon introduces himself as the head of the special department, saying it is a pleasure to meet someone so famous. In response, the hero greets him, and while Seong-jul says he has read a lot about Sujo, the hero thanks him for all the kindness. But despite pretending well, the protagonist really didn't want to see this man's face at that moment. Changing the subject, the president explains that the hero intends to take the level 5 public service exam like everyone else. Seong-jul says it will be difficult, but Sujo doesn't care. Besides, Chun-won mentions that they were given a sealed portal as a gesture of gratitude. Unexpectedly, after thinking about it a bit, Seong-jul shows a kind of concern by asking if the kid knows how a sealed portal works. Then the hero affirms that he knows very well, trying to hide his irritation. If that's the case, the department head says they won't stop him and sincerely hope he can close it. Seong-jul has always been desperate for talented hunters, so it's logical he's worried about someone promising to die in vain. Anyway, Seong-jul says he will support the kid to succeed in the exam and promises to take very good care of him in his department. But Chung-eun points out that it's not like that, since the protagonist has already decided to enter the portal department to explain. He says that the protagonist's dream is to eliminate all portals, which is why he wants to have priority entry. Still, Seong-jul sees no reason why the special department can't do the same, and when he asks him, team leader Chiolman nods his head down. In any case, if the kid really passes the level 5 exam, Seong-jul jokes that Chiolman will be in trouble, but leaves that for when it happens and makes sure to reaffirm his support for Sujo. Then the protagonist thanks him, saying he will do his best, although not without thinking of the man as a sly fox. Naturally, If the hero passes the level 5 exam, he will surpass Cheol-min, who will find himself in a difficult situation, and that's why it will be hard to approach him in that context. However, Sujo remembers that it's not the first time, so at the end of the conversation, everyone says goodbye due to other commitments. And Cheol-min takes care of giving details about the portal while they walk through the halls of the Hunter Association. The expression of his colleague becomes clear to the protagonist, so he asks if the guy is worried about him, to which he immediately responds that yes, although he is talented, the hero just became a hunter, so Cheol-min wanted Sujo to evolve more before taking such risks. The hero thanks him for the concern, but Cheol-min insists on repeating it seriously, as the kid hasn't been a hunter for long. The team leader and Cheol-min takes care of giving details about the portal while they walk through the hallways of the Hunter Association. The expression of despair from his colleague becomes clear to the protagonist. That's why he asks if the guy is worried about him, to which he responds immediately that yes, although he is talented, the hero has just become a hunter, so Cheol-min wanted Suho to evolve more before taking such risks. The hero thanks him for the concern, but Cheol-min insists on repeating it seriously since the boy hasn't been a hunter for long. The team leader tries to explain why the government seals those portals. However, to his surprise, the hero responds that he knows very well and also knows that no guild can access those portals. That's why he explains that the reason behind his decision is because he is sure that nothing will go wrong between the sealed portals. One particularly problematic is called Nameless Sword. However, the fact is that the protagonist knows the best way to clear that portal. In Youngchu, at the location of the Nameless Sword portal, the military personnel accompanies Sujo and Jinhui the reporter, who for some reason comments that the atmosphere is quite tense due to the number of soldiers at any given moment. Both of their attention is focused on the greeting between two soldiers. One of them approaches the protagonist to greet him. This is Major Kim Jung-woo, who is the site supervisor, so the hero introduces himself respectfully. While they walk, it is said that the leader of Team 1 is already waiting inside. Jinhui, in turn, asks if the portal is just ahead, and as they continue walking, the Major responds that yes, also highlighting the only thing is the surrounding material. Iron walls with super alloy were built around the portal to trap monsters and suppress shockwaves. Jinhui comments that it is bigger than he imagined, and to Sujo, it seems interesting that they placed it far away from everything at that moment. The Major informs Cheol-min about the protagonist's arrival. The team leader comments that the trip must have been hard, and Sujo asks when he arrived there. Cheol-min explains that only a few minutes have passed, but asks who the person next to him is quickly. Jinhui introduces himself as a PBS reporter, and as they greet each other, the team leader asks if the boy came to write something. Then the hero responds that he just came to take some pictures after the entrance is cleared, which is not a problem. In the end, the question was only because Cheol-min found it strange that Sujo brought a reporter with him, but Jinhui insists that the public official remember his face because he will see him often. Back to the main topic. The main comments on what he heard about the hero entering alone into the portal, which Sujo confirms. Then John Woo asks about the protagonist's level, but is surprised to learn that he is at level 51. Since everything is already ready, Sujo is granted permission to enter, but he is also informed that the door will close again, which he thanks the hero for. But before anything else, the team leader calls the hero once again to ask if the boy really knows how to clear the portal, and Sujo affirms that he does. Out of curiosity, Cheol-min asks for a step-by-step explanation, but the protagonist says that it is a bit difficult to explain, so he just asks his colleague to act in the same way he did. When facing the challenge tower in these final moments, Cheol-min strongly wishes that the boy returns safely, but Sujo surprises him by saying that 1 hour will be enough, and with an expression calm but confident as usual, she says goodbye and enters the portal, which is sealed once again. Now that the protagonist has entered, Cheol-min understands that they just have to wait and trust, but the captain asks if everything will really be okay. After all, this is not a portal that a typical strong hunter can clear. And besides, the hero is a healer, but the reporter insists that it doesn't matter, explaining that healer is just a classification given to the boy, which Cheol-min agrees with, saying he has never seen anyone handle a sword as well as him. When the hunter test was conducted, Team 1's leader was there just to observe. And of course, the hero took the healer test, but simply killed all the monsters with a sword and passed. Even Jin Woo asks if that is allowed, and Team 1's leader says he had the same reaction. But in the end, the boy protected the civilian until the end, which was the objective of the test anyway. The captain finally begins to understand the reason why the boy came there. So Cheol-min confirms his theory, remembering that inside that portal lies the incredible imperial sword known as the Nameless Sword. Upon entering the portal, the place seems like a wild, normal environment, and as he walks, the protagonist feels a strong sense of nostalgia for his past life. It had been very hard to complete it, having nearly lost his life several times. Suddenly, without needing to complete any other step, a shadow approached with the message that the boss had appeared. This was the Nameless Swordsman, whose level was still unknown. Therefore, upon encountering an opponent, he wastes no time drawing his sword from the sheath. Quickly, the nameless swordsman activates the battlefield, and while active, the boss's stats will be equal to the challenger's. Moreover, all users within the battlefield cannot use any weapon other than swords, and other skills cannot be used. However, for our hero, that was not a problem at all. And when the boss approached, he simply said it was good to see the Emperor's sword again. Finally, the first clash of blows between the two arrives, with the protagonist struggling to defend himself but reacting with a counterattack that makes the swordsman slide backward. As expected, his opponent is quite fast because he turned his own body to reduce the distance when pushed back. That said, Sujo believes it is impossible for anyone these days to defeat him using just swordsmanship. Having exchanged blows with the hero just once, the swordsman has already adapted and changed his style. Therefore, it became impossible to predict his attacks as he always used different strategies. In the end, dealing with this boss was very difficult, but it was thanks to that the hero was able to learn a lot in his past life. At this moment, the boss lunges to attack. The protagonist uses an opening in his abdomen to strike at full speed. Obviously, the enemy retreats, but his armor suffers damage, which makes him more alert. In any case, since the boss will no longer make aggressive advances, the protagonist decides to go on the offensive and begins to attack with everything he has until he reveals that this is the 16th time he fights against the Nameless Knight. Almost dying and brutally strikes one of the enemy's arms. In response, the knight tries to deliver a blow to split the boy in half, but he ducks and this time strikes the right leg of the opponent. In addition to delivering a strong kick that sends him into a bush during the existence of the portal, many people were curious to know what was inside that armor. And among those people, the hero was one who ended up disappointed everyone. Admired the Nameless Knight and called him a master swordsman, but in reality, he was just a specter without the soul of the demon sword. Even without the armor on one arm and one leg, the specter remains and the two launch into confrontation once again. The protagonist defends against several attacks with great skill, and one of them passes very close to his neck. So he defends again with his blood sword, and as he pulls the opponent's sword out of play, he delivers another front kick. Then he quickly moves down and strikes horizontally with even more force. After that, several other attacks are launched. So the Nameless Swordsman retreats to try to reformulate his strategy, but the protagonist doesn't give him time to regain the advantage because his sword style and personal technique were created precisely to overcome the Spectre's movements. In other words, the hero lands a precise cut on the Nameless Swordsman, because knowing everything about him, the knight can never win, even if he comes back from the dead. With that, the armor begins to break along with the dissipating Spectre, and the system announces the completion of the portal along with the MVP, which is or his or for the hero. It had been a pleasure to see him again, even for such a short time, because if it weren't for him, his abilities would never have evolved, to the point of being recognized with the title of God of the Sword. So his or asks the boss to rest in peace, stating that he will always remember him on Master's Day. The protagonist levels up, and all his attributes receive extra points. His or thinks it's a shame that his opponent is a bloodless ghost that cannot be absorbed. However, he picks up the sword from the ground thinking that this will only be enough unexpectedly. The Nameless Swordsman's sword is level F, known simply as an old sword, and even more unexpectedly. The protagonist breaks it with his own hands, but this was necessary to activate its use, and this is how the true form of the sword begins. Its activation, the soul of the Nameless Sword was imbued in the hero's swordsmanship, and the information of the Guardian Sword changed, elevating it to the rank S more, along with an infinite evolutionary potential, by absorbing the will of the Nameless Sword sometime later. Within the portal region, the three allies of the hero are analyzing everything through cameras. Jinhui comments that 30 minutes have already passed, but Shiomei continues to trust the hero as he is a tough opponent. Then the captain says he will go patrol a bit, but suddenly the journalist catches everyone's attention because it was at that moment that the cameras reveal that the sealed portal had been successfully cleared. Since the hero had already finished his job, he exits without any worry, and just as he steps out, he is greeted by Jinhua and Che Ullman, who run towards him desperately. It was obvious they couldn't keep calm since the hero had cleared a portal, sealed in less than an hour, the same portal that had already caused around 200 deaths. As everyone could see, he was completely fine, also saying it was no big deal. John Woo in turn asks what the boy means by that, so he reaffirms it without hesitation. However, this was still a portal that had already annihilated hundreds of hunters, so he felt curious to know more about the hero. Breaking the tense atmosphere with a smile, the protagonist invites the soldier to take a photo together, and the team leader also encourages him, saying it's just something to be recorded in a public office. So even though it's inappropriate for a soldier, the captain agrees to join, and Jinhua takes responsibility for taking the photo. Sometime later, the hero explains that the people in the photo are an association official and the leader of the squadron captain, and he also explains to the president that the person who came with him is the reporter Jinhua anyway. Don Hugh says that such an introduction is unnecessary and goes straight to the point, asking how the hell the hero managed to do it, from how he got authorization to enter the sealed portal. and clear it to how he managed to do it in such a short time. So in general summary of things, Su says he met with the president of the association, asked to enter the sealed portal and cleared it, although that is exactly what happened. Don Hugo still cannot understand how it is possible, but now that he has proven his skills, the hero brings up the topic of signing a contract and declares that he has two conditions. The first is that he wants total support while he is in Nexus, and the second is that the contract must be terminated once he assumes a public office. Says he has already informed the president of the association about this, and despite the fact that many guilds have contacted him, he wants one that understands his situation. So, even though feeling a bit strange, Mr. Hugh laughs a lot and asks the secretary to bring the documents quickly, especially because shortly after their last conversation, the hero actually proved his words. So Mr. Hugh extends his hand while telling the boy to get ready because there will be many tasks for him in the future, and with a handshake, the hero promises to do his best hours later already at night as Jin Hui drove there. His offers to drive back, but the reporter refuses, saying it is the manager's duty to explain. The protagonist always gives exclusive articles, so the boy says that acting like this is the least he can do. Jinhua says that driving a car, normally after getting used to sports cars, is comfortable and confuses the hero, saying he bought a new car, but as expected of a rich boy, he did it to give it to his or changing the subject. The hero remembers that the boy didn't go to the office today, but since he had many exclusives, he says it's fine. Besides, he asks the hero to relax, because he was already planning to give him a ride. Jinhua says he will start with the strategy to complete the sealed portal, because he doesn't know how long it will remain a secret. So the hero agrees with the plan, but the reporter says he still has one more thing to ask, and what he wants to know is how his or was so sure he would complete the nameless portal. To begin explaining, the hero remembers that the emperor was inside the portal, his or already knew his reputation, and also that the fight would only be with sword techniques. Then, even though it may sound a bit arrogant, the hero said he already knew he was more skilled. Suo mentioned that while they fought, he realized he was the sword emperor, but he also knew very well how to handle one still. This was the boss who had already eliminated over 200 high-level hunters. However, the hero says that in this case level doesn't matter since the emperor copied the opponent's stats. That's why the key to defeating him depends solely on technique without using elements or skills. In this case, Jinhua asks if the boy has sword skills, and without hiding it, the hero reveals that he has a rank S. Upon hearing that, the reporter immediately stops the car and yells, asking when the hero learns something like that. Then, a bit embarrassed, Suho reveals that it wasn't long ago. Finally, the hero asks for the news to be published, gradually so that people don't lose interest. But the reporter comments that the hero has the ability to keep people interested. Anyway, he thanks him for prioritizing his articles and apologizes for not believing him at first, and the hero, he says he is just going to rest today, and Jin Ha offers to take him home a little later. In the building where the protagonist is staying, sitting on the bed, he thinks that his stats are too good because even after running all day, he doesn't feel tired when looking at his status. There are still 7 points remaining, which are enough to gain the union benefit. In this case, all stats except one must be at a higher rank, and all of rank higher must have the same value. Therefore, when the lowest rank state is increased to match the others, there must be at least one extra point available. So when all these conditions are met, the specific requirement for unlocking is fulfilled. This causes all remaining points to be used to equalize the color states. Suho shouts with joy for having succeeded. Before, he didn't even know this existed and never thought of trying it. But in the end, it was better than expected. Thus, the hero happily lies down while thinking he will continue adjusting his states carefully to take advantage of them. That is, until his peace is interrupted by a call from that girl in the quartet named Gaeyeonwa. Then the hero calmly responds, asking how the girl is doing. Without shouting, she says she already read the news and questions the hero's relaxed attitude. However, when he simply asks how the public is reacting, the girl asks to meet. Suho in turn refuses, asking to be informed by call, which irritates the girl as she still has not accepted the offer. But in case she doesn't want to talk, Suho also says he doesn't mind, as she didn't expect that. The girl calms down and asks if they only need to do that now. Then Suho says he will explain more the next day and asks them to be at Nexus Academy at 1 in the afternoon. However, as 3 of the members are busy during work hours, the day will be tight, so the hero accepts to let it slide, since they don't seem that desperate. But just saying that is enough for everyone to drop their commitments. So the meeting of the 5 is scheduled for the next day at the agreed time in front of the academy. Nexus or Zhongguo claims that she definitely didn't skip class for the boy, but because she wanted to rest. However, until now, she hadn't said anything about it. Anyway, the girl quickly asks why they were called, and without delay, the hero stands up to explain with a terrifying expression that the 4 will be exterminated by his hands today. The atmosphere in the place instantly changes to something much heavier. However, before that, the hero asks them to fill out something. Jong-ho asks if it's a document to renounce their right to live, but she herself sees that it is actually a list of their abilities where Suho wants them to write their personal information, as he said when joining the Portal Forces unit. The boy will need people working for him from the shadows, therefore obviously he wouldn't choose just anyone to fulfill that role. That's why the hero spoke of them being exterminated, because now they would train almost to the brink about death from the basics to the advanced. And the questionnaire says it will be the only one they will receive. So since he revealed his secret, he asks for their trust. A while later in the training room of the Nexus Academy, the hero says they will finally start. Then he takes his access card that was given to him earlier by the director to access any part of Nexus freely. Moreover, that day she asked if the protagonist was going to find the hunters he mentioned at the end. Sujo was so focused on his problems that he almost forgot it, but anyway, since he asked them to go to the training room, the hero decides to start the process immediately. Through the augmented reality machines of the guild, everyone is transported to Kunlun, and from now on the hero says they will train whenever they have the chance. Since they are still below level 50, the protagonist thinks it will be easy to structure an adequate training. The training will focus on combat, since they must be able to escape from the special forces who will not fall for the group's tricks, with which Jianghua disagrees, saying they could plan the perfect strategy if given time. But despite that confidence, the fact was that the four had been defeated only by Sujo, and that's why they need to train to protect themselves and others freely. With a snap of his fingers, the hero asks them to choose a weapon, saying that the first lesson will focus on improving the basic skills of all possible things. Jianghua asked why it had to be a sword, but the answer was obvious since the protagonist has been called lately the god of the sword. That's why the four have an incredibly skilled swordmaster to use any other weapon. Sujo warned that anything unrelated to fencing was sealed, and then he asked them to try to kill him, because that would be their first objective. And this objective began with a quick charge from the protagonist and a flurry of blows that simply sent two of the four to the beyond. However, Sujo told the remaining ones that it was not the time to be scared, and as quickly as the first time, he eliminated the other two. Since they were in augmented reality, the four came back to life in panic. And now that they had already died once in training, the protagonist warned that they needed to start taking it seriously, and as the feeling of being cut alive had not been pleasant at all, everyone took their positions, making Sujo proud. Quickly, he jumped toward the four and told them to face him again. The hero provoked them, asking if they thought they would get their revenge so easily, especially because for him, even an old lady was faster. First, he went after the delivery guy, commenting that he thought he would be faster, throwing him onto the primary school teacher, who was also criticized for being extremely slow. Moreover, the boy tried to say that he grabbed his colleague on purpose, but the hero mocked those excuses, trembling with fear. The boys thought they needed to silence the hero somehow. And despite being scared, they moved forward with determination, creating an explosion from the clash of their attacks. However, the hero commented that even though they were his shadows, at least they should be able to close some portals on their own, and for that reason, with his foot on the three swords. He stated that there is no easy path to becoming a warrior, therefore, they had to reach their limits, because only when they are on the brink of death can they evolve, and that feeling was felt in every moment that the protagonist advanced, causing desperate screams to be heard. After some time, the four warriors felt very tired. The hero said he would love to continue training with them, but he was very busy, so he made it clear that the four could leave when the current time of the machine ran out, and told them not to worry, because he would leave a clone with the same abilities as him, which became obvious when the invitation told the group to come, calling them trash and obviously irritating each of them with disrespectful taunts outside the machine. Hero thought this should be enough training for now, and a call director Kim reported that the official recruitment article had been published by the reporter along with Nexus's marketing team. In this case, the hero thought it was very good news and asked if they should prepare. For him, the public reaction would not be good for now, as he had contradicted himself about becoming a public official. However, according to the plan, Kim believed they could improve public opinion for now. The hero had not yet announced that he would take the level 5 civil service exam at the end of the year, but obviously he would not keep it a secret. Therefore, just after hanging up, he called the journalist, who asked what was going on. Suo commented that he had already seen the article about his entry into the guild, but now that the public was stirred, the hero suggested they start preparing for the next, and the title of this would be the second sealed portal, because the goal of the protagonist was to conquer the swamp of despair with the publication of the first article. The protagonist unanimously received the title of God of the Sword. However, the second article about the boy joining Nexus came out, causing outrage among the people who judged him as a mercenary. That was until the third news that Sujo was heading to another sealed portal, and changed everything since he was the only one doing that. So, despite being something hard to understand, the public's reaction improved just as Sujo had hoped. Team 1 leader did not seem well at that moment. Hero asked if the entry to the Swamp of Despair had been tested yet, and Xian Min said that was exactly why he felt unwell. especially because he was scolded for asking something that would obviously be accepted by his superior anyway. Cheon Min asked if from now on, Nexus would take care of these arrangements, and Suho replied yes. He would actually take the exam at the end of the year. But in the meantime, he asked his colleague not to spread the news, which, although it was a joke, the team leader responded with great commitment about the sealed portal of rank called the Swamp of Despair, located in Jeongjando, Incheon, and just when he arrived, the protagonist was already prepared to enter with a decent audience. So far, no hunter had come out alive from the Swamp of Despair, which began to raise concerns even for the journalists. Something like that only made them want to bet. With a confident smile, Jin Hui bets 1,000,000 won on the hero's victory, and although he doesn't wish ill on the boy, a certain staff member bets 1,000,000 on his defeat. However, it is at this moment that Cheon Min falls into total despair because the portal begins to disappear, and when something like that happens, it means that the portal has unexpectedly been completed for everyone. Not even 10 minutes had passed since the protagonist entered. In fact, somehow, that no one understood, he had finished it in about roughly 5 minutes. Earlier in the Swamp of Despair, the hero entered the portal. This was a place that had claimed more lives than the portal, but without a name, and there was no information since there were no survivors in this place. There are no monsters, and all one has to do is climb the stairs to the exit. In other words, each step is in itself the challenge of the portal, filled with various mental traps, making the strategy quite simple. Equip yourself with a mental protection item or skill of rank S. Otherwise, anyone who steps on the stairs is consumed by despair, becoming a zombie beside each step. Due to the lack of information, the portal was named the Swamp of Despair because people got trapped like in a swamp. But after the portal was completed, the description changed to explain exactly what it was. Anyway, it didn't matter to the hero, because as soon as, with a deep sense of despair upon stepping on the first step, he remembered his absolute immunity to all negative mental effects due to his dragon blood, and along with his dragon armor, every time he climbed a step of despair, he could neutralize the effect with dragon blood. The Swamp of Despair was nothing more than a walk in the park for him, which is why he chose it as his second sealed portal. As he ascended toward the end, the number of zombies decreased, which meant that almost no one had made it this far. But even if he completed the portal, the hero wouldn't be able to save any of them. In his past life, the hunter who completed this portal was called Zeta. He had great mental capacity and compassion. He tried to pull out the zombies, but when he touched them, they crumbled to dust. Therefore, in the case of the hero, the only thing he could do was pray for the souls of the fallen and thus complete the portal to free them all from that eternal suffering. As always, the hero received many bonuses for being the MVP, but he was still waiting for the final reward. That soon appeared, being the S-rank emotion ring, which not only allows you to see the emotions of others, but also to store and transfer them. The treasure that Z possessed not only helped him evolve, but also helped many people suffering from emotional pain. In the past, it was stolen by bad people, but this time it fell into the hands of the protagonist without wasting any time. The protagonist puts on the ring and unexpectedly begins to descend the steps. With each step, he enters a state of despair, but the draconic blood nullifies the effect. What the hero intended to do now was to collect all the negative emotions from the steps, but soon the ring reached its maximum capacity of dark energy. Therefore, he accepted that he couldn't purify everything and decided to leave immediately. The moment the protagonist stepped out, countless people were waiting for him with cameras ready, flashing. However, the protagonist's allies hurried to be the first to speak with him. The reality was that the boy's feet had broken a record. Worldwide, it needed to be reported immediately, but before anything else, like last time, the hero asked to have his photo taken first. In just a few seconds, the news of the portal's completion reached the president of Nexus. And obviously, for a lone hunter to manage to finish it in 5 minutes was incredible. He already knew the hero was amazing, but not to the point of knowing what to do now. However, suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a call from an unknown number that wanted to speak directly with the president, and the person on the other end of the line was none other than the president of the Hunters Association, who kindly requested to discuss a certain matter with Don Hugh. At that moment, the president of Nexus realized that a meeting was being requested and there was no reason to refuse, so he suggested a meeting over a meal, to which Kim Won immediately agreed. Right after hanging up, Secretary Kim entered the room at the perfect moment, as now Don Hugh had something to discuss with the hero. Sometime after that trip, the protagonist arrived at his stop. Upon getting out of the car, he asked if Yunhawi was going to the office, and he agreed since the article about the second portal had to be written. Thus, the car drives away, and the protagonists think the reporter is great, thanking him because he was able to gather a lot of positive energy thanks to him. After walking a bit more along the sidewalk, he enters a establishment, and after being guided by a staff member, he arrives at the hall where his superiors are having lunch. Both public officials are very happy with the boy's presence, and he soon sits next to Don Hugo, While he wonders what everyone is looking for because even the leader of the space division was present, it was hard to say. First, Kyung-won congratulates the hero for closing another portal in less than 5 minutes, and that's exactly why the vice president believes they should celebrate the hunter's success with a toast. He in turn comments that he will order something simple to start, but for everyone's success, the toast proceeds as usual, changing the subject. Don-hyo is asked about the temporary contract with the hero. He then comments that he usually works with 3-year contracts, but since he is someone special, instead of tying him down, they decided to support him. So Kyung-won is happy with this decision, just like our hero. Sung-yu, for his part, seems excited to welcome him to the team for how much the country will grow, and according to this, the vice president believes they should give him a certificate of appreciation, which is exactly what he wanted, since it is practically a free pass for the civil service exam he wants to take. The president comments that they had already planned to do this after his first achievement, and explains that they just didn't do it due to lack of time. Then, using all his modesty, the hero gives an automatic response, attributing all the credit to the powerful figures, getting straight to the point. Sun-yu asks the protagonist to tell him how he closed the portal, sealing the swamp of despair after all. Since he is also an awakened one, he feels curious, because no one had returned alive from there. As always, gathering information is his specialty, and even in his past life, Sung-yu showed curiosity about this portal. However, since the hero doesn't want to tell the truth, he now plans to keep things vague. Then he revealed that the swamp of despair had no monsters, and that after stepping on the step, he wondered if he could use something to climb, which allowed him to clear the portal. Sun-yu asks if what the boy means is that he used a simpler method, and without a hint of embarrassment, the hero replies that he just got lucky. Changing the subject, the vice president asks about the boy's level, and he responds that he is currently at 53. Sun-yu then shouts with excitement, asking if the boy also has any special traits. By the reaction to the ring, he realizes they are treating him like a house pet. Therefore, he responds that although he is a healer, he received the trait Sword Path, which is quite unusual for a healer, but still, it's nothing too special. Since special forces are made up of unique individuals, he already expected not to surprise them, but seeing that reaction still irritated him, even while using sword skills. The hero claims he won't neglect his healing skills, so Don-hyo agrees to help, since adventurers are always in dangerous places, which makes Don-hyo quite happy. The atmosphere at that table leans towards a possible future-friendly relationship between Nexus and the association. This time, the vice president is the one who proposes a toast, and in the end, the leader of the special forces asks the hero not to forget about him because he can also help. So with all his acting skills, the hero says he is happy, with everyone's support, and promises that from now on he will close all portals in Korea, including the sealed ones, which further improves the friendly atmosphere at the table. So after a few hours, night falls, and when saying goodbye to the leaders of the association, the only ones left near the restaurant are Sujo and Sun-yo. The leader of the special forces offers a cigarette to the hero, and even though he declines it, he still lights one up despite having a reputation for ignoring everyone. Sun-yu hands over his contact card, and changing the subject, asks where the hero lives. Then Sujo responds that he is staying in a hotel due to the paparazzi. Sun-yo believes that people with too much free time like that are exactly the problem of the country. Suho asks if that doesn't mean they love him, but he now sees ordinary people as worms. But this was also the case with both the president and the vice president believing that the hero is still unaware. Sun-yo asks if Suho knows that this year's exam is practically done for him, but to his surprise, the protagonist claims he is quite aware of that. Anyway, Sung-ho comments that since the hero will join, they can be a bit more familiar. And from the protagonist's friendly reaction, he laughs, saying he loves his personality. However, Sung-ho cuts that topic to say something else. The leader of the special forces asks if the hero doesn't want to join the special forces immediately. With his skills, it could be possible to skip all unnecessary steps, and apparently hearing something like that was exactly what the protagonist had been looking for. Now, as expected, although he could discover any information by sending someone to investigate, he decided to check in person. Then Sujo agreed to be used for now, and with the pure aura of the ring, he said he was okay with the request. Besides, he left no doubts by praising the special forces as the heart of the association. So Sun-yo praises the hero's ambition but asks if he wasn't close to the leader of Team 1, to which the hero replies that they are just friends, unlike Sun-yo, whom he wants as a closer ally. And to explain himself, Suho simply says it's normal to want to be close to superiors. Smiling, Sun-yo laughs and says the boy acts like he lives in a second life. Then thanking him for the compliment, the hero says he would like to apply for a special recruitment. Now that the level 5 public service exam opening is approaching, Sujo believes there's no problem discussing it since he has practically already been accepted, and now, thanks to emotions ring, he knows that Sun-yo's affection for him has reached the final stage, love. So due to the positive emotions, even though the effect is not permanent, it is possible to create a favorable situation. Sujo says that his goal has never changed and that he was already looking for a special recruitment notice. Sun Yo says that this type of recruitment is rare, but assures him that he can pull some strings, and the hero praises him a lot for that actually. The leader of the Special Forces warns that it's the superiors who decide, but he can have some influence also if something like that really happens. He says that things could change for the hero, because it would mean he will become someone indispensable for the Special Forces. It is said that closing the portals is important, but his unit focuses more on things like catching awakened criminals. Suho comments that he knows about the authority to investigate awakened individuals, and most of them are fugitives, called villains. Therefore, even knowing the hero's ability, Sanyo says there is a difference between the portals and the criminals and suggests that the boy prove his worth by catching one. After all, catching a wanted criminal will leave a great impression on the superiors. Sun Yo says he has no one specific in mind, but asks the boy to be quick. So the hero swears he will catch a villain and prove his worth. Normally, his team gets scared when it comes to villains, but Sun Yo realizes that this is not the case with the hero, then walks to his car, saying he will wait for his partner. Unlike his friendly appearance in the past, what Sujo heard from Sun Yo was nothing but mockery. The nickname, Swordsman, was practically the hero's name in his past life. Back then, Sun Geo only called him appropriately when he became the king of the sword. But this time, since he has closed 2 portals, he is being treated well, and the hero knows that thanks to the emotions ring, which at least makes him happy for securing entry with something as simple as catching a villain the next day. In a building like any other, the protagonist walks silently inside. There is a large amount of smoke, with a den of skunks, and then when activating his magic detection, he sees a group of people sitting in there, which makes him realize he arrived at the right place. So from outside, even with a brick in hand, he throws it, breaking a window and scaring everyone inside, obviously with the property damage done. They come out to confront him. One of them asks if the protagonist is some kind of crazy drunk, but with a sarcastic smile. The hero replies that he is neither, and asks if they are the ones secretly stealing cryptocurrency wallets. Suho asks if Seo Hyun, the guy they have been holding, is also there. Logically, the 4 cannot understand how. Suho knows all this, and although they are scared, they believe they need to silence him. But as this conspiracy seemed pathetic to our hero, he decided to see in practice if they were capable of catching him, and if they were, he would recruit them without wasting more time actively. His shadow invocation with that spear in hand, the protagonist throws it near one of them, activating the chain and causing bleeding. A bald guy who was the bandit's partner shouts Giseyoung's name in desperation. Then the other 3 run towards the protagonist to avenge their partner. The first of them attacks with a sword but obviously does not hit the hero. The second tries to attack from the side with a spear that apparently causes some damage. However, the truth is that it didn't even scratch him, and the splattered blood was actually just the hero's vampiric ability that was activated, so it didn't take long to knock down that blonde troublemaker, but only left him unconscious, as he couldn't go any further. In response to another of his companions being taken down, the sword-wielding warrior charges, but he is also neutralized. The bald guy who previously tried to intimidate the hero can no longer stand without trembling, so he tries to flee, but his leg is hit to prevent his escape. And with that came a warning from the hero that they should stay still if they didn't want to receive more hits without anything else to resolve. There, the protagonist opens a portal to subspace and sends them all inside, and upon exploring the inside of that trash-filled house, the hero finally found the person he was looking for. It was Seek, Gian, who was wounded and unconscious, lying face down on the table. After a while, unconscious, the boy finally wakes up from that sudden fainting next to the protagonist, obviously recoiling, not knowing who was by his side. Then Suho calmly introduces himself to the boy. Gaibon instantly realizes that he is the guy who always appears in the news but still questions what he is doing and where the bosses are in the bibliography. It was written that they beat the boy and kept him prisoner for half a year, so it was natural that the conversation was difficult. Because of this, the protagonist approached with the emotion ring that reacted to the target and, going against the boy's resistance, began to absorb all his negative emotions. Suho asks if he feels a little better now, but Gian does not understand how it is possible. The hero then says that it is just an effect caused by an ability to stabilize him. Very scared, the boy asks if he is going to prison now, but the protagonist replies that everything Guy 1 did was because he was forced. Sujo never imagined that the famous meteor would be like this. Guy 1 in turn asks how the boy knew he was there since Sujo isn't even part of the association yet. Then the hero replies that he used a prediction ability, but the real reason he is there is because he wants Guy 1 to join his journey. Guy 1, of course, sees himself as someone who can't help, but the hero reminds him that he is the only one in the country. With the digitization ability among the traits that exist in this world, this is a cyber-type ability that transmits the player's consciousness to the digital world. So far, there are only 2 people with it, and no one knew how powerful it was until Overload appeared. Besides the boy, that person discovered how powerful digitization could be and cause chaos in the world, being able to control any system. Although the world had changed and the player's system was created, society still used the internet. And the person who sacrificed himself for everyone was Guy 1 a year after escaping without a trace. He gave his life to eliminate overload, which earned him the nickname Meteor. The news only came to light due to a forgotten bibliography, but this time, those events have not yet occurred, and Sujo intends to take advantage of that. Being very honest, the protagonist explains everything about the destruction of the world and that he cannot stop the tragedy. Only naturally, the boy trembles in fear like never before with this proposal. Then once again, the emotion ring reacts with a target and absorbs all that dark energy. Guy 1 couldn't believe that someone like him could threaten the world or that he would ever escape. But now he believes he might need to help the person who saved him from this place, knowing his own abilities. The boy is aware that if this power falls into the wrong hands, it could cause immense chaos. Therefore, even though he doesn't know if he will really be useful, Guy 1 says he will join the hero, leaving the protagonist, proud that the boy is the same kind man from the bibliography. With nothing else to say, the protagonist thanks him but invites the boy to eat something. Guy 1 makes it clear that he has no money, but besides saying that he invites Sujo, brings him shoes, and explains that using the same prediction ability he knew what had happened to Guy 1. In this way, tears start to form, and as the hero leaves the place, Guy 1 lets out all his emotions. Some time later, finally, the meal between the two happens. Guy 1 apologizes for eating so quickly, but the hero doesn't seem to mind changing. The subject asks if he can ask a question, and the hero agrees without any problem, calling the protagonist. Hyung, like his friends in the orphanage, asks why Sujo chose the association. After all, with his prediction ability, it could be more beneficial. Create your own guild instead of being limited by the Sujo government. He explains that no matter how big a guild is, it cannot surpass public authority. Therefore, he says he wants to prevent the destruction of the world, but also minimize the damage, and promises that he will ensure nothing like Jugon ever happens again. After joining the Hunter Association anyway, after the thanks, the hero stands up to deal with Jugon's past. Basically, what the protagonist suggests is a visit to the boy's former captors, and although he is initially confused, when the reunion finally happens, the bullies plead for mercy because this becomes a moment for Jugon to return all the abuse he suffered. So despite their attempts to apologize, the boy continues to vent his anger, and in the end, he asks the protagonist to heal him once again, which he accepts despite it already being the 7th round according to the Jugon bibliography. He continues to suffer for a long time for not having overcome his past, so this was the strategy. However, it wasn't long before a certain car appeared, and from it came the leader of the special forces. Asking if it was the protagonist who did all this, surprised by the visit, Sujo comments that it wasn't necessary for him to come, but Sung Yu refers to the hero as someone special. Anyway, it is clear to the people on the ground that they are the mentioned villains. Still, Sung Yu asks what happened to them since they don't seem very injured, and the hero replies that he healed them just in case. Something like that makes the leader of the special forces burst into laughter, so the protagonist apologizes, but that had been a compliment, because as long as the criminals don't die, some disciplinary measures are allowed. Sung Yu says he just doesn't go further for human rights. But changing the subject, the focus shifts to the boy with the cybernetic trait that was used to commit the crimes. However, after analyzing it a bit and thinking it seemed dangerous, Sung Yu decides to take him in as well. Suho in turn asks if that's really necessary since the boy is just a victim. As soon as the digitalization trait was revealed, he was kidnapped by people from the same orphanage he lived in, so he hopes that the chief considers this. In response, Sung Yu asks if this ability could be used in portals, but the hero says it seems more useful for real-world security matters in that case, since it's not useful for support or combat. Sung Yu understands they could discard it, and for the hero, this is a case where the victim cannot be punished for their individuality. Because after all, he was just an innocent person. Sung Yu agrees not to punish the victim, and not only that, he also promises to help him get compensation from the bullies. Then the protagonist thanks him, although the chief says it's not necessary. Anyway, as expected, Sung Yu asks how Sujo found this case. Then in another one of his excuses, the protagonist explains that Yuban used his ability to create a rescue request that Sujo saw, and despite trying to downplay it by saying it was luck, the leader of the special forces comments that luck always follows those who deserve it. A promise is a promise. Sung Yu says he will call soon to talk about special recruitment. Then Yuban, still a bit scared, asks what he should do, but in response, the protagonist simply tells him to come along. Sometime later, the two arrive at the luxurious apartment of the reporter. Obviously, Jugon is amazed by the size of the hero's house, but they tell him it's not his. It actually belongs to the reporter Jinghua, who is simply not there because he is on a work trip for a few days. Jugon asks if he can really stay there, and the hero makes it clear that there's no problem, but he also asks him to keep the ability to predict a secret. The boy understands this instantly, summarizing that Yugon was kidnapped as soon as he reached level 50 and awakened his ability. So as they will have to face overload in the future, they should focus first on leveling up. With that, the boy asks if he will also have to close portals from now on, but Sujo explains that Yuban should actually level up on his own using his digitization ability first. Sujo suggests they connect, and since the boy is unsure, he asks if the description of the ability states it can only be used on oneself. He explains that the boy's trait can also transmit the consciousness of other players to the virtual world, so in an attempt to put the idea to the test, digitization is activated. Suho sends a request wishing to transmit his consciousness to the virtual world, and Yubana naturally accepts, so the connection begins. Shortly after, the hero is surprised, especially because he never imagined that something like this could be real. Right after, the hero G1 materializes, and both seem quite surprised. This is the Windows XP work screen, and there were grapes because the theme photo was taken in a vineyard. Despite that, it's a shame the food there has no taste or smell. Anyway, the boy asks how he can level up there, so the protagonist asks what A1 thinks he should do. In the end, he just needs to earn experience points and grow as long as the user's actions are recognized by the system. However, just like in the Association's Hunter exam, only skills can level up. Even though they cannot replicate human senses, he still has a physical presence. That's why he managed to hack cryptos. Anyway, the hero says he prepared something very special for him in a computer folder. The file name is Free Cleanup File, but it's actually a virus. The boy asks if he will really level up using a computer virus, but since they look like monsters, they will act as level challenges. If they get hurt there, they will also get hurt in real life. So the hero asks them to be careful and above all, not to respond. The question suddenly appears. A woman in the room asking if they would like to use the free cleaning file, because it's something quite eye-catching. It almost lures them into a trap given that the boy's class lacks a mage. Sujo leaves him a weapon as a precaution, explaining that he knows this due to his precognition ability, making Yuan responsible for support. Once again, the secretary asks if they would like to use the free cleaning file. Even without a response, several distorted beings are generated with the same question, leaving Yuban scared, but upon activating his blood weapon, Sujo warns that unlike them, they can escape if things go wrong. If the boy really believes he won't make it, he can simply run for the door. Then the protagonist attacks the first one in the neck, blowing the head off the specter. But in the end, he also makes it clear that if Yuban doesn't pay attention, he could end up the same way. Without wasting time, the boy activates his magic and even facing so many monsters. The protagonist advances without any fear. After a while, finally, the last one is defeated while the boy tries to recover. The protagonist comments that he has reached level 59. Unlike him, Jugon only reached level 55, but for Sujo, the boy was capable of becoming a useful mage in the Banshee. Anyway, for today, the training was enough for them to return home later. While refreshing himself with a can of soda, Sujo comments that it's good to have a way to level up without needing to enter a portal now and decides to check the reactions about the Swamp of Despair. Almost unanimously, everyone was idolizing the hero and demanding a national plaque of thanks. Then Sujo started to boast a bit, thinking about how much more respected he would be once he closed more portals. So far, everything was going according to plan. So the hero moved on to the next stage. While traveling in his executive car, the leader of the Nexus Guild received a call from the hero asking for a small favor regarding what it would be. He remembered that the corporation had the rights to a rank S portal, and that's why Sujo requested the rights to the portal, making it clear that he would forego any rewards. This rank S portal is dominated by territorial monsters. It's a mine with a large deposit of magical stones. However, there are so many monsters that it's practically impossible to collect the stones in this case, since he wants the portal for himself. Sujo suggests that the rewards stay with the guild, even if the guild owns it. If there are too many casualties, the government takes the title, so if his uncle can conquer the place, Donhue immediately agrees as he is so. Sudden, the hero says he decided to do it as payment since he will join the association sooner than expected, so he will take care of the team that will help with the elimination and Donhue will assign the miners. Then the guild leader thanks him for considering informing him in the Nexus Academy Hall, in Pagu that tanker truck from before called Dahan greets the protagonist Subu cheerfully and introduces him to Gaibon, saying he is a fellow Hunter exam participant. However, thanks to the protagonist's advice, Dahan comments that it was quite easy shortly after the cam. Hero asks what he has been doing lately, but since he is still in training, the tank says he is not part of any guild. Normally, once someone joins a guild, they put the hunter to practice in the attack unit with the least chance of death. In this case, the hero suggests that it's a great opportunity to gain experience together since he's about to challenge a portal. Dahan is very surprised by this and more than anything, shouts that he is ready to go right now. Then the Hiro agrees to train immediately, which leaves Dahan a bit surprised since it was just an expression back in that training subspace. The quartet continues fighting against the hero's clone. However, they do not seem to have made much progress because one is eliminated very easily, and soon that emotionless clone of our hero approaches the leader at such high speed that she has no way to defend herself. Inevitably, the four come back to life, but Jungbu gets angry and curses the protagonist. What happened at the worst possible moment since everyone noticed he was there in person? Anyway, the hero comments that the atmosphere between them has changed a lot lately. Then the girl responds that it had to change since they died at least 100 times their judging. By the look in their eyes, everyone has become indifferent to death and have developed a good killer instinct. Anyway, the hero reveals that he brought 2 other guys to join the training. That's why everyone introduces themselves, so they can better understand their allies. Since they are training hard, the hero asks if they are already bored of this place. But unexpectedly, the 4 agree that they will not leave until they rip the clone's head off. And surprising the other 2 guys, the hero responds saying that's exactly the attitude he is looking for. After all, that's the only way to survive in that portal, so starting today they will train together. Sugu asks Junggu to form teams with the 2 newcomers so they can train well, and now, speaking of the portal, the hero says they will spring into action soon to the girl's surprise before anything else. He mentions that they should define nicknames for easier communication. In his case, he just asks to be called leader, then he leaves, saying that she needs to take care of some things while the 6 stay there training. As it's the first time for the 2 boys there, they ask what they are supposed to do, but the girl says they will find out soon. Meanwhile, the clone of the hero curses the group and mockingly tells them to come attack him. Then Dahan comments that it is very different from what he imagined, and Jungwoo is getting more and more irritated. After a while, the hero's taxi stops as they are near the outskirts of Pashu. Despite everything, he accepts it because he knows that cars can't go very far. Activating the ring, Mumu activates the colorless solitude of rank S, reducing the boys' presence. These are the surroundings of Payu. Once they were called the Land of Gold, it used to be a very prosperous region. But due to constant portals and the lack of hunters, it became a dump. These damn portals not only destroyed this place, but caused everyone to fall into misery and vice. So once again, the hero remembers his commitment to close the portals as quickly as possible. But even a dump like this has its uses. And ironically, in a region rejected by people, there is a place that welcomes a few from inside a door. A man asks who it is, and the hero responds that he wants to buy a mine, then deactivates the colorless solitude, revealing his identity as a hunter too. The man's surprised, he quickly opens the door and inviting the protagonist to enter. He asks him to take a seat. As they are still not open, the man asks if it's the boy's first time there, but he responds asking if he is uncomfortable. In this case, yes, it is uncomfortable to wear a mask all the time. The man is very worried about how the boy found out, but Subu tells him he can relax because now he is the only customer, so since there's no reason to hide anymore, he reveals a girl. She is one of the top portal runners in the country, and the best in Payu, named Choi Jun. Although she is not very well known yet, John immediately asks how the boy discovered not only that place, but also the jargon used to refer to the portals, but the hero replies that he can explain it another time because he is there to talk business. And to his surprise, he asks if the girl has the distorted forest in her possession, because what he is trying to do now is buy a ticket to challenge the portal. Given that this item was announced 3 days ago, the girl asks how he found out, but Subu questions if he really needs to say everything in the black market. After all, it's a rule not to talk about anything except the transaction. There are 2 types of portal purchases. The first is the transfer of ownership, and the second is a ticket that serves as a one-time entry pass. Usually only the ownership is always much more expensive, but even tickets for famous portals exceed the cost of other portals, even though the fee is already high at 100 million wons. The girl is worried that the hero will go alone. However, he says it's his business while placing part of the payment on the table. In that case, Yuna agrees to take him there and apologizes, saying she was just a bit surprised. In a car, the 2 approach the place next to the city bridge, and on the car dashboard, the emblem of the association that the girl just joined can be seen while passing through the Gaseong region. The girl asks if the hero isn't surprised that they are approaching North Korea, but the protagonist replies no, because due to the portals, North Korea completely collapsed. And although China thought about taking advantage, monsters infested the place. In that case, Jung comments that the boy knows much more than he seems in the articles, which makes him believe that he left a good impression. With no time to lose, the 2 get out of the car in front of some hunters. John immediately says that he brought a guest and that the payment is already confirmed. One of the thugs is impressed to see Sujo in person because he thought he would just be another braggart. Anyway, the boss that the protagonist was looking for appeared, saying it is an honor. This is one of the leaders of trafficking in the city whose name is Bang Do, okay, or the lumberjack. Human traffickers always called their victims logs, and this guy sold them like merchandise, pure, which led to the nickname. Sujo knows he was arrested and sentenced by special forces but didn't know he was also connected with the association, although theoretically, the hero could enter, now as someone who completed 2 sealing portals, only you, or who believes they could end up losing since they only sell tickets because they know no one can pass it. This was already expected by the protagonist who knew the criminal's personality. However, John intervened asking if Duke was really trying to raise the price right in front of her, and made it clear he wouldn't let such a low play go. Then since she is a true member of the association, even Duke OK can't act greedily, which in the end was good for him since Sujo was ready to act without discussing anything further. There Jun calls the hero to go directly to the entrance and makes it clear he will be by the boy's side the entire time for his safety. The mercenaries are the type that ambush those who enter and complete portals, so to prevent that, the intermediaries need to be strong to ensure the client's safety. Anyway, DOOK comments that the best way is to see in practice who Sujo is to have so much confidence and is very curious to see if the boy will be able to complete this one too. The distorted forest portal has the entry condition of up to 8 people with a maximum level of 99, but our hero enters alone without any problems. He never thought he would see this forest in his life, because even in the past it was a place he never visited. However, he arrived there with the intention of getting an object from a certain famous person. Once he obtained with all his concentration active the detection of mana, making his energy spread through all the tree trunks, and in this way the trees, distorted from level 90 to 93, reveal themselves from their disguise and come to attack. But the first one that tries to get close is immediately struck by the shadow spear, since that's what the hero has. Although an axe would be more ideal, at the same moment, another of the monsters tries to attack the protagonist with a massive claw. Suho has heard that the leader of the mental monsters is much stronger than these here. Therefore, just like with the nameless sword, he believes he needs to take the opportunity to evolve his sword skill, and in that way, he uses his beheading skill, but due to the 30-level difference, one hit was not enough. For now, he does not want to use any holy power to improve his skills. Then a second strike is made, and this time it takes one of the monster's arms. These mutant trees are a problem for hunting, but the hero believes it's worth it, and with so many punching bags around, he already feels stronger to keep fighting with great fury. The monster tries to attack, but the hero uses the tree's own body to get closer and propel himself upward. Then mercilessly he brings down the monster with a bloody sword. After a while, many tree trunks could be seen on the ground, and standing over all those monster remains, the hero believed he had trained enough, so he activates his status window and realizes he has everything he needs. But a system message appears saying that the healing light has reached a higher rank. Thus the skill is upgraded to its superior version called Heal up to level 40. Skills are received, and at level 50 they advance to rank until at level 60 they evolve further. Then at level 100, the hunter can choose the final class that will follow, descending from the top of all those trunks. Now that he had cleared the area, it was almost time for the boss to appear. In a nearby river, the silhouette of a being could be seen from afar. Over its head it had horns like those of a deer, and its eyes shone with energy. This was the ruler of the dark forest, level 100, called Malian. Finally, the protagonist will face a 1-star monster. It is said that there are several ways to classify monsters, but anything below level 99 is not considered. Starting from 100, they gain 1 star for every 100 levels. In this case, Malian is the first star-rated monster that the hero will face in this life. Taking the initiative, the monster comments that an unwanted guest has appeared, but in response, the hero calls him an intruder, saying that he doesn't want him in his city either, but knows that it's not like the monster knows anything since it's just a creation of the system. Quickly activates the shadow summoning along with the holy power, and in the end, the hero throws the spear without worrying about the details at an abnormal speed. The weapon approaches the boss, but he catches it with his hands, and upon hearing about the holy power, he asks if the hero is a servant of God, which his opponent denies while creating a blood sphere in his hand. To continue with the first ineffective attack, he throws the blood sphere at the spear, increasing its penetrating power, and upon managing to damage the star monster, the hero mocks him, saying he expected more from someone in shape. However, even wounded, the monster pulled the spear from his chest without feeling any pain, and clearly became angrier than ever with the protagonist's insolence. The forest begins to tremble with fear from the rage he radiates. Malian and a terrible killing aura surrounds the protagonist. The intent to kill from a star being is truly on another level. But with the dragon blood activated, the effects are nullified by the dragon armor, because in the end, something like this is nothing more than a worm compared to the power of a dragon. Melian becomes curious to know what kind of spell that is, but the hero responds that it is simply the result of his effort, once again uses his shadow summoning. And the monster is increasingly surprised by the tricks, but the hero responds that he hasn't even shown half of the resources he has to demonstrate the shadow prison. The bleeding activates at the same time, however. Melian laughs and throws the weapon away, calling this attempt to attack him pathetic, then decides to show for himself what a real technique is, and with arms open the river begins to boil. Then from the water, enormous tree trunks rise, all of them masterfully controlled by the star monster. Then he smiles and asks the hero to face the difference between their levels, and naturally his opponent does not back down. So, when the first attack nearly hits the protagonist, he dodges using his blood ability to slow down, and with his vampire sword in hand, he uses his speed to surprise the enemy with a decapitation, but that wood was harder than that of the previous monsters. With another attack, he dodges and tries to strike again, but all he manages to do is deflect Alien's blows. He is disappointed, saying that the hero's fencing is pathetic, but he responds with a smile. Not for long, since he only needs a little more for his strategy to work. Melian tries to understand what the hero is doing, since he created a sword that couldn't cut and also stopped using the holy power from before. So naturally, he must have something in mind. However, regardless of anything, the monster convinces himself that all efforts will be useless, and since the hero looks like a disoriented insect, he decides to end the fight now. Like this, he controls all of his trunks to split the boy in two, but at the moment, death seemed to approach the protagonist. That trunk was split in half with that single cut. Melon realized that Suo had only been accumulating power all this time. Still, he couldn't understand how a human could cut his ancient roots like that. But Suo continued at full speed and saying that the main course was about to arrive. The reason he had used so much decapitation was to demonstrate his skill, since when the system determined that a skill had reached a certain level, it recognized its understanding and then evolved it as expected. The system announces that the boy's understanding with the sword is greater than anyone else's in that skill, so it absorbs the decapitation and evolves it to rank S, making it capable of cutting even to 0. Moreover, the will of the nameless sword within the guardian's sword responds to the evolution of his sword's skill, and thus the system begins to update the information, until it congratulates the hero for becoming the successor of the empty style, unable to tolerate all this accumulation. Malayan sends the more roots toward the hero, and this time all merge into one that becomes bigger and more powerful. But now the hero is no longer the same, and he splits it in half, using only the first strike of the empty style, called Steel Cut, leaving the monster worried as it tries to understand what kind of spell he is using. Suo, but once again, Suo says that all he has is simply the result of his effort. And since things are about to get more fun, the hero tells the monster to get ready. When the hero first created the guardian's sword, he thought it was the pinnacle of swordsmanship, but quickly realized that it was just one more style, and due to the many supernatural beings in this world, it was not possible to face them using just the human swordplay. After recognizing the existence of the nameless sword, the first non-human technique he learned, the boy was the first form of the empty. Malayan screams angrily, saying he will destroy the boy's spells. But with the steel cut activated, the hero calls the monster stupid and faces the ancient roots head-on without any problem. The floor boss cannot understand how something like this is possible. Then the protagonist asks if, besides being stupid, he is also blind for not being able to see his potential. Malayan yells at the boy not to get so arrogant, just because he cut some roots. Then the ground shakes, and to the protagonist's surprise, distorted golems appear all over level 100. However, even now, he mocks them, saying that the summons are weak for a druid. Overly confident, Malayan claims that the boy will not be able to cut them, and sends them towards the hero. He dodges the impact of the blow at the last second. With a jump, he restructures his stance and without any fear, advances against the enormous arms of that golem. Then the steel slash activates once again, and with the empty style at full power, he defeats the golem. Distorted, Malayan doesn't even know how to react at that moment, especially because the protagonist eliminates not only the first one, but all the others, since his sword is capable of cutting to 0. This was just another reason to mock if that was really all the monster could do. Malayan's rage reaches an unparalleled level, and he shouts to all his subordinates to take care of the intruder immediately. However, no matter how many challenge the hero, the outcome remains the same. The waters tremble with the impact of the warrior's blows, and Malayan still cannot believe what he is seeing. Meanwhile, he laughs, knowing that his opponent is already at his limit. Therefore, he pushes all his strength from his feet to end this once and for all. In an instant, the protagonist appears in front of the monster, cutting the roots that protect it, and without wasting time, kicks Malayan in the stomach with all his strength, sending him flying into the river. Obviously, the monster becomes furious at a level he has never experienced before. However, at that moment, he has no time to cling to his pride, because his attack continues, and using the chain of the shadow spear, he manages to bind his opponent. By this point in the fight, Malayan is already tired enough to break free from this trick. So with nothing else the monster can do to defend himself, Suo delivers the final blow. And thus, the first boss of an S-ranked hero in this life is defeated, turning the forest portal distorted into a completed portal once again. The MVP is Suo, who earns additional rewards and levels up, receiving extra attribute points in all stats. Additionally, in the end, he obtained the Orb of Domination from the corrupted S-rank druid. Malayan was known as the corrupted druid, and his power of domination led to his expulsion from the forest where he was born, taking with him those he drove mad. All of this, the hero knew that although the empty style was important, this orb was even more crucial for the next portal, and in any case, it was time to return. Outside, everyone realizes that the portal begins to disappear, which means he managed to complete it, but it is still hard for everyone to believe it. The level of the portal was S-rank, and since it only allowed a few participants, it was the goose that laid the golden eggs for Duok, bringing him many fees, but now the bald man had to deal with the idea of losing everything to Suo. In the end, he invested a lot in it and the hero basically ruined his business. Therefore, unwilling to let this go unpunished, Duok ordered his henchmen to prepare. Jun, on his part, asks if the man really intends to move forward without considering the consequences. And really, he would have agreed if he hadn't been attacked from behind by the hero at that precise moment. To his surprise, in an instant, that mercenary falls to the ground. This was the same moment the protagonist came out of the portal. Then walking slowly while collecting blood with his vampiric ability, he asks if they started the party without him. All the mercenaries, without exception, lose any desire to fight for obvious reasons. Then one of them comments that the boy can leave now because they won't bother him anymore. However, the hero now kindly asks them to return the fee he paid, using the excuse that this is a punishment for breaking the rules, and since everyone wanted to stay alive, Suho obtained what he asked. For some time later, back in the car on the way back, Jun thanks him and the hero understands the reason for the gratitude. But instead of simply accepting it, he asks for a favor next time. In this case, the girl comments that she has quite a sharp tongue with a hint of concern anyway. Sujo asks him to give her his contact number because she will call him soon, and so when the trip ends, the hero bids farewell, thanking her for the trip. But maybe what he didn't expect was that Yoon thought of him as someone much better than she expected. A few days later at the Nexus Academy, early in the morning, an executive car arrives at the entrance facing the place. Many people ask the leader what they should do. It being Sujo, the leader says he will explain everything when they arrive because they can't keep the boss waiting. Thus, the group of 6 people trained by the protagonist departs with him to the Miners' Island. In the remote region of the portal surrounded by thick metal walls, an executive car arrives at the place. From there, Don Yuk thanks the hero for coming, and Sujo thanks him for the trip anyway. He said this is the Miners' Island, where they built this facility to temporarily suppress the energy as requested. Apart from the hero's team, all the staff brought is part of the mining team. In this case, the hero decides to enter, so they can start with an informative meeting and a straightforward speech. He said that inside the mines there are mining kobolds that can be scared into collecting the magical stones and defeating the boss. However, the president's secretary is surprised that it's just that. In any case, the hero replies that the reason there isn't much information is because he will handle the boss alone, and finally makes it clear that all the profit from this portal will go solely to Nexus. Then a handshake occurs between the hero and the guild. President Suho tells the mining team to stay behind them at all times, and with nothing more to say, the hero asks how his colleagues are feeling before entering the first portal. But since none of them seem to be enjoying themselves, he tells them to stop being dramatic. In any case, Suho warns that they will need to conserve energy. Daehan will handle the rear Joe. One will provide support and the others will follow the hero. However, it is said that the focus will be on protecting the miners, and unlike the simulation, everyone could die from any mistake. And finally, the portal opens for the challengers to enter the Miners' Island. It has a maximum entry capacity of 56 people, and its information begins to load. Just upon entering, the hero goes through a copper that he sees in front of him and instantly charges at another with a blood weapon that is also capable of successfully going through the monster. By draining all that blood, the hero plans to store some while he can, since there aren't many observers around, and just that display of agility in defeating all enemies is enough to leave everyone speechless. But the mining team is even more surprised, since not even his teammates had seen him in action before. In any case, the girl leads the team so they don't just stand there watching. Soon everyone organizes with the goal of not letting a single kobold live. One does his best to cover, and Daehan also performs well in his role as a tank for now. Jungwoo asks them not to advance but to maintain formation, and since the group can handle itself, the hero believes he won't have to worry with the new command. Yangwoo reports that the mining team can now begin to work, and as it is in order, everyone gives their best as quickly as possible. At this moment, the minerals behind them are piling up, so it is necessary to manage transport without letting any product go to waste. At one moment, one of the workers yells, asking what his colleague is doing standing instead of working, but the truth is that it was impossible for him not to be. He was impressed by the way the protagonist was annihilating the monsters in front of him. In an instant, the hero goes through the little ones, and just after crushing one against the wall, he hits 2 more, using both the Shadow Spear and his Blood Sword. This way, the monsters coming from any direction are taken down so easily that it seems like a joke, and as the protagonist's stance remains as imposing as ever, both the miners and some team members begin to understand how incredible the guy is, but the miners get even more excited to the point of wanting to give their best just because they can be next to Suho while casually walking. The hero notices something, reports that everyone is already gathered there, so the protagonist asks if they can see the divider. It is said that the reason Nexus abandoned this place is that the kobolds surround everything like a hive. So the suggestion arises to split up. However, unexpectedly, the hero announces that he will go alone down that path. After all, an advantage of having lived 2 lives was knowing that the boss was right there with the steel cut activated. The division is completely destroyed with a single attack this time. Everyone is surprised that the hero can cut solid stone as if it were paper. As he made a small opening, the hero comments that he will go left, while they stay there to handle the right. At first, he thought about sealing it completely, but that way they wouldn't gain experience. However, regardless of what happens, Suho makes it clear that they should not follow him, and beforehand warns that he will be absent for 12 hours. Then he asks the group for patience, something with which they all agree, since there is no other option. For this portal, the hero believes he will need to act for at least 12 hours if he wants to get everything he came to find. So he says goodbye to face the boss alone, since the hero himself blocked the entrance. The question arises of whether he will be okay and if this could be a test. But despite the doubts, Jaguar asserts that he will be fine. In the end, he comments that everyone knows this since their own leader has handled several difficult portals. So the group really has no doubts about his ability, and in this case, they decide to do their best in the assigned tasks, using this time to become strong enough to make the protagonist proud. Now inside the cave where the hero locked himself, he realizes that he no longer needs to hold back, and with hundreds of kobolds in front of him to face Suho, simply asks who will be the first to be exterminated. There were really many of these monsters for the boy to face, but even though there were so many, none were above level 75, so Suho didn't think twice before launching into the attack without exception. All the kobolds responded aggressively, but their behavior did not change their fate of being defeated by the protagonist. Still, one managed to survive clinging to a rock at the top of the cave, and taking that opportunity, he lunged to attack from behind. Sensing that unusual presence, the hero responds, defending himself with great skill. Suho says it is impressive how smart the monster is to use tricks, although it is a futile struggle since its leader has already been defeated. Returning to the perspective of the group brought by the hero, it seems that no more monsters will come aside from those already defeated. That's why the mining coordinator calls everyone to rest and eat a little, as it is already noon. The entire mining team finally has time to rest. And since the hunters also work hard, the miner asks how they are doing, to which Yawan replies that they are fine as expected. The miner comments that the hero's group is incredible, but Yawan humbly reminds him that Suho blocked most of the way. Even Yamo has to agree, because if the monsters hadn't come out 1x1, they would be in trouble. Their first encounter was definitely not pleasant, so the girl thought he would be a problem, but somehow she grew fond of him to the point of now being worried, although he also knows very well that there is nothing they can do to help him. Therefore, the group's idea remains to trust their leader and wait patiently. Shifting to the protagonist's perspective, while he eats, he also takes the opportunity to collect blood while nibbling on a chocolate bar. His ability is fully fueled due to all the destruction he has already caused. When the protagonist stands up, the monsters enter a state of mental confusion. He was able to pass by them without any of them attempting a reckless attack. Clearly, everyone is quite scared, but the hero reassures them, saying that he is not interested in them after all. From now on, his next opponent is the master of the mine located at the end of this place. As it is too dark to see, the protagonist apologizes, then equips a firework launcher, and with this object, he shoots towards an abyss, illuminating everything with the flares that explode with each burst, revealing the background of the area now. A monster called Valdasari, level 99, and his name comes from the belief that he cannot be killed. Having grown up eating mineral, he is very resilient, and even before reaching the ranking of a star, he is among the strongest. Because of that, by summoning his shadow spirit, the hero believes he must wake him up first, and so, without thinking twice, he throws the weapon at the mutant. Obviously, the fight would not be that easy, and that only served to make him open his eyes, although he wasn't even expecting that result. In any case, now that the attack was executed, the awakening of the monster was complete, with huge claws breaking the ground with each step. Valdasari finally woke up from hibernation full of energy. The fact that his leader had awakened revived the fighting spirit of the kobolds. Back in the region where the secondary group is, everyone feels something like the presence of an earthquake, but Yamo realizes that this vibration seems to come from where the hero is. Then he worries more than ever, wondering what he is doing. Returning to the protagonist's perspective, Suho has never looked so surprised. As it seems, he touched the whiskers of a sleeping lion. With all his accumulated rage, the monster uses its boss-level fear ability and roars, showcasing all its majesty. Despite that, the dragon's blood activates and fear does not apply due to the draconic effect. so the boy remains completely in the battlefield. The monster in turn becomes enraged even more, and raises its trunk to attack the intruder, who woke it up with all its strength. However, in response, the protagonist confidently summons his blood sword to confront him directly. Then unexpectedly, the monster shoots a piece huge of mineral from its trunk. Instead of making a physical attack, it is said that the steel spit is an ability that converts the stored mineral into projectiles, and because it is so simple, both its destructive power, while their durability is impressive, in the end, the durability of the material is only equal to 0, and in that case, the protagonist uses the steel cutting ability, which is perfect for neutralizing the threat instantly. Just like he did before in his fight against the corrupt druid, he splits the opponent's tricks in half, and now that there's nothing left to stop him, he blows, to use this time to tame the beast.